workers. Just to say to members that it's always good that we acknowledge that when our work is acknowledged, and that Assembly Member Duval will be appearing alongside other regional high-profile representatives in front of DCLG's Select Committee shortly on this issue. On Wednesday, return to an issue that the Assembly has been very active on, burst water mains, and we welcome the environment work on this matter, and members of that committee are determined to keep the pressure on Thames Water and others to ensure that these bursts don't happen. Transport Committee got a lot of attention, as you do when you invite celebs into the chamber. What a worthy cause in terms of that discussion on bicycling in London. Excellent. I've watched it, and a good 100,000 people have watched it. So well done, members of the committee, and well done, the chair, Assembly Member Prince. Can I also welcome to the meeting students from the London School of Economics? Are you here yet? Excellent, who are on the enterprise programme focused on global business, and students from School Council at Gatehouse School, Tower Hamlets. We'll say the welcome, and then they will join us. And then lastly, we again don't promote ourselves as much as we can, and that's why I do this sort of update, to say that there is such an interest in the work that we're doing here. And Assembly Member and I, Copley, met the Mayor from, remind me.
Candidate for Mayor of Belgrade.
Mayor of Belgrade, and told him about the wonderful work that we're doing here and the GLA. So let's go to item 2, declarations of interest. Can I ask the Assembly to note the recommendations set out at item 2? Can I ask the Assembly to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interest or any other relevant interest where they relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting? None? Okay, item 3. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the minutes of the London Assembly plenary meeting held on 25th January as an accurate record? Agree, thank you. And then item 4, the final draft consolidated budget of 2018-19. And let me just read a few words onto the record. Further to Standing Order 6.4, this meeting will be used principally to consider the Mayor of London's 2018-19 final draft budget consolidation budget proposals. Now, I will begin by asking the Mayor to present his final draft budget proposals, focusing in particular on changes to the budget's proposals since they were last presented to the Assembly on 25th January 2018. The Assembly will then put questions to the Mayor on the budget proposals for up to an hour, and finally move on to debate and vote on those budget proposals. The Assembly's consideration of the final draft budget is covered by the budget procedures set out in Standing Order number 6. So, good morning, Mr. Mayor. Can I ask you to present your final budget proposal, focusing on any changes that you have made to that budget since you last presented it to us on the 25th of January?
Chair, Assembly members and the public gallery, it's a pleasure to be here today to discuss the details of the final draft budget. As I said at our last meeting in January, this budget is designed to deliver on my ambition to ensure that all Londoners get the opportunities that this city gave to me. I don't have time in my opening, Chair, to list everything in our budget today, so I'll focus on where it's changed, as you suggested, since we last met in January. The most immediate challenge facing our city is the rise in crime that is happening across Britain, after years of government cuts to policing and preventative services. The government have repeatedly refused to act on the funding crisis facing police services across Britain, and have left me with no choice but to take the unprecedented step of increasing police funding from London business rates as well as council tax. In January, I announced an extra £49 million for the Met Police from raising council tax. I can confirm today that I'll invest an extra £59 million a year to support an additional 1,000 police officers than would otherwise have been affordable in 2019-20. I've allocated an extra £5 million in 2018-19 to MOPAC to spend on recruiting additional police officers. This is the maximum additional amount the Met can spend on officer recruitment, given the amount of time it currently takes for the Met to recruit new officers, something the Commissioner and I are keen to speed up. And I'm also providing an additional £55 million to MOPAC in 2018-19 to reduce their borrowing, which will lead to a saving of £3.3 million in capital financing costs in 1920 and later years. The money saved will be used each year to fund the Met's work with Londoners with mental health issues. In addition, in 2018-19, I'll provide £2.1 million for this mental health work and £0.6 million for work to tackle violence against women and girls. However, tackling rising crime will also require us to be tough on the causes of crime. Therefore, in this budget, I've created a new £45 million Young Londoners Fund to support education, sport and cultural activities for the next 3 years. £10 million a year will be used for a new fund into which local communities, charities and schools can bid for funding. And £5 million will be used to scale up existing City Hall projects in this area. In the face of ongoing risks from the government's chaotic handling of the Brexit negotiations, boosting London's economy is crucial. I'm pleased to announce that we're currently inviting bids from across the GLA group for a new £140 million fund for strategic investment projects to help address the workspace, infrastructure and housing challenges that are barriers to economic growth. This is funded from £113.6 million from the business rates devolution deal negotiated with the government. In addition, I'm providing £26.4 million from additional one-off business rates. In light of representations made by London boroughs and Assembly members, I'm allocating an additional £11.6 million to TfL in 2018 and 19 for boroughs to invest in local projects that support the Healthy Streets approach set out in my draft transport strategy. That's an average of £350,000 in extra funding for transport this year for each London borough from my January draft budget. This is a one-off allocation and future years' funding will be considered as part of TfL's business planning process later this year. And it means that despite the government cutting TfL's £700 million annual operating grant to zero, in total, an unprecedented £237 million will now be given to London boroughs to spend on local projects in 2018-19. Other changes from my previous draft budget include £47 million for an additional public sector partner to enhance an offer in the cultural and education district, a temporary additional £11.8 million to the London Fire Commissioner to ensure that the capital programme is not affected by the sale of the Southwark Fire Station site, £6 million for TfL to provide toilets for bus drivers so they have basic dignity at work, £1.3 million for a homeless mental health project, and £1 million to boost the London Borough of Culture programme. I'm also ensuring sufficient administrative funding is available to support the devolution of adult education to the GLA, which is critical in the face of Brexit and for next year's GLA pay review. Ahead of this year's budget, I was pleased to receive representations from Assembly members on some of the specific challenges we face as a city. I'm pleased to be able to announce today that I've chosen to allocate additional funding in some of these areas. I received representations from Assemblymember Leonie Cooper about improving London's environment as the government continues to exclude London from national funding. I'm pleased to allocate an additional £6 million for environmental projects, which will enable further action on air quality, single-use plastics, expanding London's water fountain network, and additional funding for green space and trees. Chair, yourself and Assemblymember Shah, long-time campaigners on the abhorrent practice of female genital mutilation, put forward proposals to do more to raise awareness of FGM across our city. I've agreed additional funding as part of our increased investment in tackling violence against women and girls. As the Assembly know, I've been very vocal in my support for EU citizens, Londoners, who live in our city. I've accepted the proposals from Assemblymember Fiona Twycross to put aside money in my budget to provide an online advice hub for EU citizens to support them through the coming years as their residency status will change. Other representations reflected in the final draft budget include Assemblymember Unmesh Desai's request to supplement existing work on tackling modern-day slavery, representations from several Assembly members on childcare, and Assemblymember Len Duval's request for more to be done to combat domestic abuse across the city, and also to work with our fantastic cultural institutions and support them to take artefacts into care homes to revive the memories of dementia sufferers, something Assemblymember Dr. Onka Sahota also lobbied for too. To be clear, the increased sums available from the previous draft of my budget are possible because of the strong statutory returns from billing authorities for business rates. The uncertainties associated with business rates, including the appeals process and the large sums of money involved, meant that there was a wide range of potential outcomes. As an example of this, one authority alone, Westminster, is responsible for the entire increase in the business rates collection fund surplus of £74 million. My officers and I have taken a prudent view since the start of my administration on what business rates growth we could expect. I'll continue to adopt such an approach and will not take risks with London's finances. That's why I've also allocated £2 million to fund future GLA group collaboration initiatives to deliver further efficiency savings for the benefit of London taxpayers. I look forward, Chair, to discuss these proposals in more detail.
Thank you very much. The process that we're going to go through now is that one member from each group will put an initial question to the Mayor, and then following that member, I will call subsequent speakers in the order in which they indicate. So, and the order is firstly the Labour group, followed by the Green Party group, followed by the GLA Conservative group, followed by UKIP group. So I'll take the first question, leading the Labour group, Assemblymember Copley.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. My question is about property development and TfL land. Could you tell us how many homes will be delivered on TfL land by 2026?
Thank you. Thanks for tweeting your question. Which gave me an advantage at the time. I appreciate that.
I'm glad you're following me.
If you recall, there is quite a considerable amount of surplus TfL land. And one of the things I've charged the Commissioner to do is bring forward TfL sites where we can start building homes. And the expectation I have of TfL is across the sites they have, half of the homes to be genuinely affordable. The amount of starts they've identified by 2021, there was some in the pipeline before I became Mayor. So from 2017 till 2021, 10,000 starts, which means by 2026 there should be 10,000 completions. And over the course of the next few years, I'll be asking TfL to release more sites to take us above the 10,000. But I'm confident that we have a pathway to have 10,000 homes on TfL land by the timeline you've given.
Well, that's very good to hear, particularly the fact that 50% of them will be affordable, genuinely affordable. I just wanted to check, your first business plan, which was published in December 2016, said we have increased the scale and pace of this development, referring to TfL land. Could you tell us a bit about how the scale and pace has changed?
So what helps the TfL in relation to their plans going forward is the draft London plan. You'll recall a discussion we've had about the presumption in favour of residential homes on smaller sites, which helps small developers. That gives TfL a big opportunity in relation to the smaller sites that they have. And so they've identified now the sites across London, including in outer London, where they could have homes being built. Not all of the sites will be 50% affordable, by the way. It's just worth, so it's across the piece, 50% will be genuinely affordable. Some will have fewer than 50%, some will have more. And we've already, over the last period, identified some sites with partners in which we can build these homes. And the other speeding up has been, is Mike Brown, the Commissioner, sits on the Homes for Londoners board, and in next week's Homes for Londoners board is doing a presentation on exactly your question. What are the sites? What is the progress? And I've got some numbers, if it helps you. So in relation to 17-18, the starts that there are 180, of which 92 are affordable. And over the next 4 years, 92 out of 180. Yeah. And over the next 3 years, there's a projection, 18-19, 256, 19-20, 2896, 2020-21, 5715.
Are these starts?
These are starts. Yeah. But even worst case scenario, a start by 2021 should be completed by 2026, as you suggest. Some of those in the pipeline we're accelerating, but because planning consents were given in advance of me being the mayor with fewer affordable homes, we can't retrospectively change that. But we're making sure we're learning the lessons going forward. Some of this, by the way, is keeping the freehold. You'll be aware of the concern, if some of them is expressed, about selling selling the family silver, not keeping the freehold. Some of them are keeping the freehold, others are partnerships with housing associations and others with developers.
And of course, it's worth reminding Londoners that this income will go some way to, we hope, towards replacing the money that the government is taking away from Transport for London, which amounts to £700 million.
Yeah, we won't fill the hole. I mean, it's worth reminding ourselves that, for example, in 2014, I checked the numbers, 2014-15, roughly speaking, 12% of TfL's revenue came from the government. 12%. Next year, 0. We're the only public transport system in the Western world not subsidised by central government, and there are consequences in relation to roads, in relation to investment going forward. That's why we've got to be more innovative and transformative in relation to our assets, but at the same time realising we need genuinely affordable homes for Londoners, rather than simply selling off land to the highest bidder, than having luxury flats Londoners can't afford to live in.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. The Green Party Group, Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, my question is about TfL. The £6 million that you've promised to invest to ensure all our bus drivers have access to a proper toilet is great. And this addresses one of the key concerns outlined in the Bus Drivers' Bill of Rights that I raised with you in November. Some of the testimonials we heard in the Transport Committee about the stress and inconvenience of bus drivers not being able to get to a toilet, especially while drivers were menstruating, were really upsetting. But other things need solving. The Transport Committee asked for a wide-ranging review of bus driver working conditions with a focus on the causes of fatigue. You've said you won't do that review. Is that because you can't afford to do any of the things it might recommend?
Well, I met with Chair Unite the Trade Union this week to discuss the two reports, one done by the Assembly and one done by the Unite Trade Union. What I've agreed with Unite is to have an independent report done in relation to fatigue in this whole area. It's really important we get to the bottom of why our drivers are fatigued, feeling the stress they are. A lot of that are things outside their control. One of the things I was keen to do, Caroline, was to learn the lessons from the horrible accident in Croydon with the tram. There are crossover lessons we can learn. And so I want to reassure you, we take this issue seriously. Unite have done some survey work themselves, interviewing 6,000 drivers. But I take the argument for an independent survey, and so that will be done soon.
So will that, you say soon, when will the Transport Committee be informed? Because at the moment it's showing as a red flag that you're not doing it.
Can I share can I drop you a line to give you the timelines in relation to that? Because obviously I'm keen for it to happen as soon as possible. I'm not sure, but I'll write you.
Thank you very much. That's really useful. Thank you.
Okay. Assembly Member Bacon.
Mr. Mayor, you have announced both in the media and also this morning, the investment fund, the £140 million investment fund. How much of that money is recurring year after year?
Good question. At the moment, we've been prudent in our calculations in relation to recurring. So if you remember, there are three pots of money. One is the joint money between us and the local authority. One is the money we've got. One is money local authorities have got. The government agreed to a one-year pilot. And so originally 2 years, now it's 1 year. And so it's a decision for the government to take. We're hoping to persuade them from the sensible choices we make that they should continue. But we're working on the basis of 1 year, but obviously hoping the government agree to make it permanent going forward.
I mean, there'll be cross-party support for that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
I think you know
Thank you.
all parties and London councils as well as here would be in favour of that. So the 140 million is 1 year funding?
On that basis for the time being, but we're quietly...
Yeah, okay, that's fine, I understand it. And you have announced that it's for people to bid into for various projects. What kind of projects are you expecting it to be spent on?
Well, so I think we've got to show the Treasury that there's some value added. It's not simply, inverted commas, bread and butter stuff. So workplace is a good example in relation to we can help people with workplace. It leads to increased productivity, increased revenues of the Treasury. That might persuade them that we're better at spending this money than, for example, Treasury. It could be around housing, if that's an issue, infrastructure to do with housing. And so I think what we've told ourselves is, what we've set ourselves as challenges, what do we think would impress the Treasury in relation to value added? That's the sort of parameters we've given to...
Okay, I mean, I totally understand that. That makes perfect sense. But what kind of outcomes are you expecting from it? Because to impress the Treasury with value added, they will need to see outcomes. So what outcomes are you expecting?
So, Assemblyman, the criteria in draft at the moment and will be considered by mayoral advisors and senior officers next week before going to the mayor. Essentially, we are looking at things that boost London's economy, and we may well see then the benefits of that in business rates in future years. And so it is going to be criteria around things that help particular sectors or particular areas that will help businesses there really succeed, or things that provide the infrastructure needed for businesses to do so. And as the Mayor says, housing and strategic investment there is an important part of that consideration, given that businesses rightly raise the housing crisis as a very significant factor for them.
And if it helps, Gareth, I'm hoping to delay making my decision until after we know the outcome of the Housing Infrastructure Fund application we've made to government, because obviously that may affect decisions we make. So if we work on the basis that CLG will come back in April with HIF decisions, I'm hoping to make my announcement shortly thereafter, after considering the HIF decisions, to see if we can add value there as well.
Okay, and any grants that are awarded from this pot, over what period of time are you anticipating them being spent?
Well, one of the lessons I learned from advice you gave me, good advice, last year was to be savvy with recurring funding if it's one-off. So the decision will be made whether we split the monies over, say, 3 years, 2 years, 4 years, or give it in one lump sum, and that's a decision as per the application. But the discipline I've got to have is no guarantee this money is going to be recurring, so use the pot we've got, and if need be, split some of that for 3 years rather than an expectation of another 140 next year.
Okay, no, that's fine. And how are you going to be monitoring implementation? Because again, it comes back to the outcomes point that I was making earlier on. If you're trying to impress the Treasury, you need to deliver something.
I mean, you're right, we need to be able to demonstrate to the Treasury the value of this. It's really important that we do that. What we don't want to do is create a load of bureaucracy around it. And so our thinking is that, firstly, it will depend on the individual schemes that are proposed. So, for instance, if a transport scheme gets funding, the initial monitoring would come through Transport for London processes and the oversight that we all have of those. But then what we'll look to do is have a facility that brings together all that oversight so that there's a common picture that people can look at to see how things are going and the value that's being delivered.
And just another thing for you to think about is, additionally, there's a £55 million that us and London councils, the pool money, there'll have to be consideration of how we monitor that and in relation to value we add there as well. And we've delayed that until after May for obvious reasons with the elections in May.
Yeah, I mean, this is fine so far as a discussion. When can we expect a bit more detail? I understand you can't necessarily have all the detail right now because it's a brand new fund. But when will this be something, for example, that you might bring to the Budget and Performance Committee? The reason I'm asking the question, it's not intended to be difficult, it's because there's an opportunity cost to spending this money on this rather than something else. And obviously the Assembly will want to be satisfied that you're going to get bang for your buck, rather than, it's a very good initiative, but if it doesn't deliver anything...
Well, can I say, I think we should. I think that's one of the roles you perform is to provide the checks and balances, and often there are good ideas, and so let's do that.
Yeah.
Can I undertake to do that?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, I think I'll leave it there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Assembly Member David Curtin.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Yes, morning. Hi, morning. My question to you concerns TfL and the transport network. What do you expect to be the impact of the surprise fall in passenger numbers on the public transport network?
Do you mean what in tube,
In
overground, bus?
the buses and on the tubes?
So there are, roughly speaking, 11 million journeys across the whole family of public transport in London. The overground has, we've had good news there, there's been growth in the London Overground. Underground has seen a sort of 2% dip reduction. Buses historically has seen a reduction, but we've now had a plateauing effect, which is good news. On the buses, I'm looking forward to us seeing the benefits of the priority traffic lights, us moving buses from inner to outer London. On the underground, I'm hoping to see a plateauing of the 2% reduction. Some of the things are outside our control. Some of these things could be do, for example, with people's working patterns, could be with leisure activities. But we're trying to do what we can to stabilise passenger numbers in London. There are other cities that have also seen a similar dip. I looked at the figures for New York. We've also seen a 2-3% dip in relation to their underground as well. I think some of this is lifestyle changes, some of this is leisure activities, and so the business plan makes projections going forward, and we're hoping to see passenger numbers better than they have been in 17-18.
I'm just looking at the figures from TfL, and it does project that there will be an increase in revenue from passenger fares of 156 million in the next financial year, as above this financial year. But the outturn compared to the prediction for this financial year is lower. So the prediction made at the beginning of this year, in 2017, was 140 million more than the predicted, the current prediction of fare revenue. So you're predicting it to go up again. How confident are you that your revenue from fares will increase by 156 million?
At the last budget meeting in January, I gave a table and answered a question originally asked by Caroline, then followed up by Susan. The last 4 or 5 years of predictions TfL have made and how accurate they've been. And I think they're roughly speaking within 2% margin of error, which ain't bad when there's 11 million journeys a day. So I'm quietly confident that their forecasting is good. Their forecasting is used by the Bank of England, used by economic pundits to see trends in relation to the labour market in London. So I'm confident that we have the most sophisticated ways of forecasting passenger numbers, but clearly it's sometimes an art, sometimes a science.
It's also worth adding, Assembly Member, that the projections for next year and the year after, of course, see the opening of the Elizabeth line, and that's one of the factors in the increase in revenues that the budget shows.
And the increase in capacity on, for example, some of the 4 big projects taking place on the Met Circle district and others. So there's some increased capacity there as well.
Is the Elizabeth line going to open on time at the end of this year?
The plan is for the Central Park to open in December 2018, and then for it all to be up and running by December 2019.
Okay, right, thank you.
Thank you. Now I will call on members who have indicated they want to speak. Assembly Member Desai.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Morning.
Firstly, can I welcome and thank you for all the various announcements you made in your opening presentation about support for our police force and also your support for work around modern-day slavery. My question is about how you allocate resources, police resources, to deal with unexpected demand. So it's perfectly understandable that police resources have to be reallocated to focus on urgent issues that arise at short notice. So we know that 120 officers have been drafted in to review all rape cases throughout the Met due to problems with disclosure. So at a time of reduced funding, how are these demands taken into account in your budget so that the police can redeploy resources and react quickly? And very specifically, with the reorganization of territorial policing into 12 basic command units, How does this impinge on your flexibility to deploy these resources?
Thank you for your question. So let me give you the short answer, which is the Commissioner is in charge of operational matters within the Met Police Service. In addition to the example you gave of the review undertaken by 120 officers to do the rape, there are roughly speaking 200 police officers working on Grenfell. When there's a terror attack, hundreds are involved in relation to those. It's more difficult to do when you've got 30,000 officers than when you have 32,000 officers. The way the structure of the Met Police works at the moment is based upon 32,000 officers. That's one of the reasons why we're moving to a basic command unit, because the current model doesn't fit with having 30,000 officers, and so the basic command unit serves a number of functions. One is to save money, but two is it's a way of us being able to adapt to 30,000 officers and having the flex we need within the system. But it is tough. So, for example, it has been the case that officers from the wildlife unit have been called away from the wildlife unit to help out in Grenfell. Often it means detectives being moved from one sector to another, and it has an impact. I mean, the point I'd make is, at a time when the demand on policing is going up, the supply of policing, because of government cuts, is going down. It doesn't make sense. And I'm afraid the consequence that Londoners will see is in relation to routine preventative work that used to happen. There'll be less of that because officers are being called to do other things as well. Just the final thing I'll say is this, which is often those of us who look at balance sheets criticise an organisation for too much overtime. Well, you can understand why in the police service there's a need for there to be overtime at short notice. Officers often cancel their leave, often working long hours, coming on days when they shouldn't do, and so we should recognise that rather than just looking at a balance sheet and expressing concern about overtime figures going up and recognising why that is.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Eshalomi.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Hi.
I just briefly wanted to come back to TfL and finances again, and again, sort of highlighting the fact that the 700 million grant will be a big dent in TfL's figures. But coming back to some of the questions that Assembly Member David Curtin alluded to in terms of passenger numbers, following the session last time, Alex Williams stated that part of the decline is partly down to safety concerns following last year's terror attacks in London and Manchester. How much do you think that has an impact on people travelling across London for leisure?
So what we saw last summer was, just worth reminding ourselves of the horror of last summer, 4 big terror attacks in a short period of time. What we didn't see was cancellations of visitors from overseas. A number of reasons why that was. They booked, they paid for it, but also I think a message was received in relation to the safety of our city. What we saw a reduction in is relation to the discretionary day trips from people outside of London coming to London. And by the way, the major tourist attractions in London also saw a dip in their numbers as well. It wasn't simply on TfL, the dip. We're hoping that will return as people become more confident in relation to safety. But also it's worth reminding ourselves that some of that dip could have been caused by families outside of London not being able to afford coming into London for a day trip or whatever, in relation to household incomes being less because, we know wage growth has been low at a time inflation has been high. That's one of the reasons why I feel so passionately about freezing TfL fares rather than raising them by 42%, which is what the previous mayor did.
What other additional things do you think that you could look at in terms of bringing passengers back onto the transport network in London?
So one of the things that Val Shawcross has looked into is the impact of lifestyle changes on Londoners, how we shop. When we look at the data for credit card transactions, or we speak to major retailers, or we see footfall, there has been a reduction because people are doing it on the internet now, shopping on the internet. That has an impact in relation to public transport. One of the things we've got to do is make it more attractive to have the experience of shopping. One of the reasons why we want to pedestrianise Oxford Street is to make the experience more pleasant. It's the busiest shopping street in Europe. We want to make it a pleasant experience. We're also looking at in relation to how we can promote leisure in London. Deals to attract people to London, really important. We're confident the London is Open campaign, London and Partners can do that for overseas visitors. Other cities around the world have noticed a dip in shopping. It's not just London as well. One of the reasons we're moving towards more buses in outer London is to encourage more use of buses in outer London as well. I think the Elizabeth line opening later on this year and then next year will help in relation to increased capacity. But we're trying a number of different things to try and increase people using public transport in London, or to walk and cycle, also things that we encourage as well.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Assembly Member Berry.
Hi.
So, Mr Mayor, I want to ask more about the new fund for youth projects. This is really good news. I'm so pleased that since last year, you've genuinely listened, you've looked at the evidence, you've been persuaded by myself and others, and you've actually done this. It's split over 3 years in your final budget, and that's what my amendment to the last budget meeting put forwards. And that's right, because youth organisations, they don't want short-term stop-start funding, so that's all great. Last year you told me that there isn't a money tree in City Hall that can replace what has been cut by the government, and there isn't, but you've put £45 million in. That will go some way. The latest numbers I've got back from councils this year show this will plug about a third of the total amount that's been taken out of youth services since 2011. So I think you've done what you can now. The government will need to help too. Yeah, I just want to say thank you, which is not something we always do here. Actually, I want to ask you about the timing of the process. I know a number of organisations who are basically ready to bid now for the fund, just dying to apply for any kind of funding. The group campaigning to reopen Grove Park Youth Club in Lewisham, for example, are pretty much ready to go. But there will be other groups for whom it would be really useful to get an idea of the rules and the deadlines so they can focus on getting themselves ready to bid in the right time. So can you give us any idea of the timing today and the criteria, and also which deputy mayor will be responsible for it?
Sure. Well, Sean, thank you for saying what you said and the way you said it, and for the work you've done in this area. And I did read your report last year, and you gave me a further copy this year as well. So to answer your question directly, we're working on the processes now, but we don't want to make it bureaucratic or difficult. So you can start talking to our officers now, any youth club that wants to talk to our officers now about getting their bids in. What we're also going to be doing, Sean, is this year in particular helping those groups who aren't used to filling in forms, don't know how to do it, to make sure that they get some money this year, but get hopefully even more support next year, 1920. But we're going to give them something this year. So we don't want to just go to the usual suspects. There are some people who are brilliant and are good at filling in forms, and we shouldn't denigrate that. There are others who got good ideas but don't really know how to do it. And so the team will be helping in relation to that. Deputy Mayor Matthew Ryder, working closely with Deputy Mayor Sophie Linden and Joanne McCartney, will be the 3 deputy mayors in charge of this area, because it affects, we're hoping the bid will be some cultural, so Justin will be involved, some sports, some education. We even want schools bidding for some of this money as well. After schools clubs may need some supplementary support as well. We don't want to be prescriptive, so it's a suck it and see. We're waiting for applications and interest, and we don't want to be too inflexible about this.
Okay, they'll be in touch, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Pigeon.
Very much. I would like to ask about your budget and bus services.
Sure.
Because I think many Londoners are surprised that you're cutting bus services in every corner of the capital, from the W12, which is serving Wicks Cross Hospital, to the C11 in West Hampstead, and on our doorstep here, the RV1 zero-emission bus services are being cut in half. You're committed in your budget to cutting London's bus mileage by 7%. Will you at least agree to consult Londoners on significant changes to bus timetables?
Well, Chair, I don't accept the premise of all that 2-minute question. What I will say is this. Look, we want to increase the numbers of people using buses. I don't think necessarily increasing kilometres equates to increase users. All of us have experienced empty double-decker buses driving around parts of London at a time when the bus network is rightly subsidised, and at a time when the government is cutting that subsidy, we can understand why we prioritise buses around those areas where there is the highest demand. One of the things that I was struck by in answer to a question that Flo asked me last time was the fact that we didn't have robust data about mileage in outer London versus inner London. And so what I've asked TfL to do is to provide the Assembly with more information towards the end of this year when the business plan has been worked on, so you can be reassured But give it the scrutiny in relation to where the buses are going. I have said in the past, and I'll repeat it again today, there will be fewer buses in those parts of central London where there will be improved public transport because of the Elizabeth line, because of change of usage of bicycles, and because more walking. What we want to do, though, is the increased buses in outer London as well. And I've asked TfL to work on providing the Assembly and Londoners with more information about where the additional buses will be seen. And so hopefully, by the time of the preparation of the business plan, late 2018, you'll have some more information in relation to that.
But bus services do seem to be being reduced right across the capital, not just in inner London, where many of us are expecting it. But what I ask is, will you consult Londoners on changes to bus timetables? People are very surprised to find they're just informed from Saturday you're going to have half the number of buses you had on Friday. So will you look to consult on these major timetable changes?
Well, we always look to consult, and I'll raise this with the Deputy Mayor for Transport to make sure we are properly consulting.
Great, thank you very much.
Assembly Member Dismore.
Chair, I was also going to ask you about bus services, Mr Mayor. You mentioned Outer London. What are you allocating to improve bus improvements in Outer London?
So what we're doing is making sure that we have ways to encourage more usage in Outer London. So, for example, we've got 120 bus priority schemes to make traffic light timings more efficient. We're also investing increased services around those areas of Outer London where there's increased housing, whether it's in Thamesmead, Lower Lee Valley, Wembley, Eldo Common, Acton, Barking, Riverside, Wandsworth Riverside, Hillingdon or Colindale. And so there will be enhanced services in those parts of Outer London where there's additional housing. There'll be additional services in those parts of Outer London where we're trying to encourage people to have fewer car trips and more bus trips as well. The figure we have is to increase bus usage, the growth, by between 25 and 40% over the course of the next 25 years. So if you'll remember, the transport strategy draft talks about 80% of journeys being made by walking, cycling or public transport. A big growth area we see is bus patronage going up as a consequence of that. And so you'll see over the course of the next year, as we prepare the business plan, more details being given. And I've, as a consequence of a question raised by Flo Shalomi, made sure that TfL will provide you with data in relation to Outer London figures before the business plan is ready for the end of this year.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's clear that if we are to persuade people to use cars less in Outer London, the main alternative is the bus service. And if routes have less frequent buses, then it's self-evident that people with cars will use this ready alternative to the bus, and they're less likely to be tolerant of less frequent bus services. And I have raised with you before the night buses, the daytime bus routes that have been reduced frequency or scrapped in Barnet and Camden, including the 13 bus, which is reassigned to the 82, about which I'm still getting complaints over 6 months later. Other examples of the C11 Brent Cross to Archway via All 3, the 384 serving East Barnet and JCOS. All have had their frequency reduced and all led to considerable kickback from the public through complaints. Isn't there a risk that bus usage ends up in a self-defeating downward spiral if the frequency or convenience of routes is reduced?
That's the danger. We've got to make sure it doesn't happen. I mean, the good news is the Hopper fare, for example, is at 150 million journeys, which shows the progress we've made in relation to the link between making transport more affordable and seeing more people use public transport. The Hopper also gives people the advantage of using a different bus than they were using before. But in Outer London, it's a particular challenge because there's usually no alternative. And that's why we're trying to focus on Outer London services to have more frequent buses, better services there. And I take your point very seriously that actually, how can you encourage people to leave their car if the buses are unreliable and infrequent? And so one of the things we hope to do before the business plan is published is to give you some reassurance that there has been some reconfiguration to benefit Outer London. The whole process will take between 18 and 24 months because of the Elizabeth line coming in. So, you know, by the end of 24 months, you'll have seen hopefully big improvements in Outer London.
Well, again, thank you for that. I mean, I endorse the argument that consultation on frequency is important, but when frequencies are changed, will you also look at the impact on ridership on those routes? Because if the net result is fewer people using the buses, it does become a self-fulfilling prophecy that it just gets worse and worse and worse. So if fewer people are using them, will you look at restoring the frequency of the buses to go back to where it was.
Yeah, yes, the good news is we can now monitor usage at a bus stop. And I know you've raised this before, so if you've got particular issues about a particular part of your patch, please feel free to contact Val and we can provide you with the data. And if it's the case that obviously there's been a consequence of a decision taken by TfL in relation to buses that is not good, of course we should be willing to revisit that decision. We want people to be using public transport. Buses is a lifeline, particularly for those parts of London without an underground or a train station nearby, and so of course we'll revisit those decisions.
Thank you.
Assemblymember Boff.
Mr. Mayor, how many of the homes that you've announced today for on the TfL side, you used the figure of 10,000, how many of those were already in the pipeline prior to your mayoral?
So the 10,000 is separate from those in the pipeline. So in the pipeline is roughly speaking 900. So the 10,000 is a separate figure from the 900, if that makes sense.
It's in addition to what was in the pipeline?
Correct.
Thank you for that. You've announced, you quite rightly identified the importance that female genital mutilation is to Londoners, and you've allocated £0.6 million to campaigns. Could you expand on what those campaigns are, please?
Well, firstly, you've also raised this issue in the past, and thank you as well for raising this in the past as well. So, Sophie Linden will be publishing shortly, April, before PERDA, we hope, the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. And in that strategy, she'll give out the details. One of the issues I know was raised by you, as well as by the chair, was giving confidence to groups to come forward, them understanding it will be taken seriously by the authorities. Also making sure, don't put words in your mouth, but this isn't lost in the bigger issue of violence against women and girls. Absolutely. To make sure there are discrete groups who do just this work. You'll be aware there's one prosecution taking place right now in relation to that. That prosecution came because, I don't know if you were the case, but basically somebody was told about the behaviour of somebody and reported it to the police. So the education and campaigning is working. But we need to scale that up. But the details will be given to you when the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy is published in April, very shortly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I ask that you spend some time, or use some of those resources, to address the issue of what's perceived as an ignorance in the multi-agency safeguarding hubs about the pointers to female genital mutilation? It's come to my attention that some of those cases could have been identified earlier had those each borough's MASH units been more aware of the symptoms of female genital mutilation.
If you drop me an email, I'm really happy to look into that, of course.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, you've named me twice, so I have to come in as a point of clarification. And following on from what Assemblymember Boff has said, totally agree with what he's saying. There's work to be done there. But can I just thank you on behalf of all the community activists who helped me produce that report, tackling FGM in London, working towards a zero-cutting city. And can I ask you to actually ask the DM responsible for this area that the two key recommendations was for a pan-London campaign, and the other one was about funding community activism at the front line, because it's within the community that we can get change. So just wanted to put that in there, because you named me.
Yeah, and I hear you loud and clear, as I always do.
And thank you for recognition and staying true to your commitment that you will work to bring about a zero-cutting city. Right, back to the agenda. Assemblymember Cooper.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for your kind words at the beginning. And it's an absolute pleasure, I think, for everybody to know that you're so committed to the environmental agenda and more money on air quality, dealing with the plastic waste in our city, and improving and maintaining our green and open spaces is very welcome to everybody. Another area that is also very close to my heart, and I was very pleased to see your Fuel Poverty Action Plan come out with the draft environment strategy, is making sure that we are tackling fuel poverty across the city. And in the circumstances of the recent collapse of Carillion, which was amid lots of profit warnings and concern about a lot of public sector contracts, there's also been concern about Capita, who I believe have been involved in managing the Renew project. And I just wondered, are they still managing that project? Have we assessed whether there might be any risk in terms of continuing to work with Capita? And obviously that could then create a problem in terms of your budget in seeing that through.
Okay, thank you for your question. Before I get to Capita, can I just inform you that actually what I've done as a consequence of the Carillion saga was to task TfL to look at all our contracts to see whether we should bring them back in-house. I'm meeting with the various commissioners and chief executives of all the GLA functional bodies next week. We'll be discussing the same issue there as well. I think outsourcing shouldn't be something you do as a first resort. I think you should look to see whether it's in the taxpayer's interest. You should see whether there are systems in place to tightly monitor what the contracts and contractors can do. But if you can do it in-house, why would you outsource it in the first place? And so these are big questions that we're tackling head on. In relation to the Capita work that you mentioned and the work they're doing helping us in relation to us reaching our target of being a zero carbon city by 2050, the contract they're involved in this area is to do with the Renew contract, for those colleagues that aren't experts like you may not know. So the Renew contract is a contract that helps us make sure we have more homes that have less carbon emissions and less bills. It addresses the issue of fuel poverty, but also addresses the issue of zero carbon as well. So we have very good project reporting systems in place and a risk management system in place. But as a consequence of what you talked about, I asked my senior team to look into this. They've spoken to Capita, and my officers have assessed the project and budget risks to be low. And the reason for this, just to reassure you, is there's only two and a half months remaining in that contract. All the European Investment Bank key performance indicators have been met. That means 90% of the programme funding is secured and the other 10% comes from us. So thank you for raising that. I think we've done the due diligence that you'd expect us to do. But there's a bigger issue about outsourcing that I'm looking into as well.
Thank you very much for that full answer, Mr. Mayor. That's very helpful.
Assembly Member Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, first of all, thank you for a clear explanation about funding that you announced in relation to FGM-related work. May I also take this opportunity to thank you for this very important piece of funding, which will certainly help the promotion of work, which is so much needed, including campaign with the communities and local stakeholders. My question is particularly now related to post-funding, post-Brexit funding to cultural institutions. Can you tell us what steps are you taking in your budget to ensure that cultural institutions remain adequately funded after leaving the European Union?
Thank you for your comments and your questions. It's worth reminding ourselves, in addition to the enrichment it gives to our lives, having good culture in London, it helps create 1 in 6 jobs in London, the creative sectors. It's really important. And so we've got to recognise that as a consequence of leaving the EU, there could be challenges in us being the cultural capital of the world, in my opinion. So we're doing a number of different things at Navin to try and make sure that we don't stop being the great cultural city that we are. We've invested £70 million, the biggest ever investment from any mayor in culture, to the Museum of London's relocation to West Smithfield. That will help double the attendance of the museum. I announced earlier on this morning almost £50 million towards the London Legacy Development Corporation and the building there. We want a new world-class arts and education district in that part of London. Next week we'll be announcing the winners of the London Borough of Culture, £1.35 million to each one of those winning boroughs. The Behind Every Great City campaign is really important for culture. We also invest, and many people may not realise this, we invest in Film London, in the British Fashion Council, London Fashion Week finished just on Tuesday. Her Majesty had a good time, I'm told, going to one of the fashion shows, and the London Design Festival as well. One of the things that the independent economic impact assessment we published recently showed, I'm afraid, is that if we're not careful, if the wrong deal is negotiated with the EU, we could lose a considerable amount of jobs in the cultural sector as a consequence of the wrong sort of Brexit. So we're lobbying the government as well, and I met with David Davis and took with me Sir John Sorrell, the founder of Creative Industries Federation, to impress upon David Davis the importance of this sector to London and the country as well. And we're going to carry on working with the EU in those sources of funding that are still coming our way, the European Regional Development Fund, but also Creative Europe as well. This is a really, really important area for me as the Mayor, and that's why we'll be publishing soon London's first ever cultural infrastructure plan and announcing details of our creative enterprise zones as well.
Thank you for that. Mr. Mayor, you've picked up funding of some of the cultural institutions. The question is that do you believe that you can still deliver programs such as creative enterprise zones if you were to lose EU funding? Particularly, I note that 2 million investment for creative enterprise zones is from EU-funded streams. Will it be viable if you were to lose that funding?
So the good news is the government's given us the reassurance that they will fill in the gap up until 2020. Some of the programs that are longer, they've given the assurance they'll fund until 2023. So for term one, I'm confident. It becomes more tricksy after 2020. And you'll be aware of discussions published in the newspapers today about transitional deals and what conversations the Prime Minister is having. Yes, to answer your question, I think we can still meet my wishes for the cultural enterprise zones and the creative enterprise zones in term one.
Next question is about the current negotiations on the EU. Will you pressure the government so that they can protect our creative industries in their Brexit negotiations with the EU?
I'm not sure who has influence over the Prime Minister at the moment. What I can give you some good news about is I was impressed by the recognition David Davis had on the importance of the creative sector. Credit where it's due. I mean, when Sir John and I went to the meeting, David Davis was well informed. He knew the importance. He knew the importance of, from music to fashion, from other cultural areas as well, the arts, the galleries, the theatres, the tech sector, and that helps. If the person doing the negotiating with the European Union understands the importance of a certain sector, you would hope that when he negotiates with the EU, he wouldn't do anything to decimate that sector. So, I'm hoping that he takes on board his experience and knowledge to make sure we get a good deal with the European Union. But it is times of uncertainty.
If you can very briefly comment, Mr. Mayor, in the worst scenario, should cultural institutions lose EU funding, will you be able to step up and somehow bridge that gap, which is so critical to London's economy and culture?
I'm afraid I can't give that guarantee. There are so many competing priorities that we have. I talked about in my opening the concerns around policing, the concerns there are around the government cutting the annual grant from TfL. And so we've heard colleagues raising questions around the consequences of bus services, police numbers. The point I'm trying to make is culture is important as well to our city. And that's why we've got the first ever cultural infrastructure plan coming soon. Just like we have long-term plans for housing, for policing, for transport, we must have long-term plans for culture. For the reasons you're well aware of, we need to, in a non-patronising way, educate the public why it's so important, and any help you can give is much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Okay, let's just take a moment to, just before you go, don't go yet, let's all wave at students from the school council at Gatehouse School, Tower Hamlets. Yeah? Thank you. Right. Assembly Member Devonish.
My question is for Martin Clark to start, if I may. Mr. Clark, is the TfL budget sustainable in your view?
Yes.
Did you read the Financial Times leader last week and Tony Travers of the LSE's Evening Standard article?
I don't recall the specific article, no. No, not the detail of it.
Okay. Am I correct in stating that to balance the budget, as the FT said, you would need, TfL budget, you would need a 30% increase in paying tube passengers to balance that budget by 2021? Is that correct?
Sorry, I don't recall the detail of the article, so I'm having trouble to respond to
Maybe
Mr.
Bellamy can help. Is it correct that you have predicated your TfL budget on tube number increases of 30% by 2021?
The budget is predicated, as we touched on earlier, in response to Assemblymember Curtin's question of some very prudent assumptions in the next few years. The normal, in terms of the forecasting that TfL does to work out fares, it normally looks at GLA economics forecasts for London's economy and takes the base case. In the next few years, they've been more cautious than the base case, representing the uncertainties inherent in the economy as we go through the Brexit process. The numbers also reflect, as we discussed, the extra ridership that's going to result from the opening of the Elizabeth line. And so, as you would expect, there are a variety of factors behind that forecast.
Did you read the FT article and leader column and the Tony Travers article? These aren't Tory organisations, these are independent, well-respected bodies, and they are seriously concerned, to quote Mr Travers, unprecedented criticism.
I did read the articles. I remember that the Financial Times leader was complimentary about the plans that TfL has to make itself more efficient as an organisation and address the consequences of the withdrawal of the government operating grant.
And in terms of the 30% passenger increase figure, I mean, that really is. If you're running any business, major business, and you think that you can, in this current economy, that we can all for different political reasons say the economy's got strengths and weaknesses, do you really think a 30% increase in passenger numbers is in any way credible?
I have to say, I'm not remembering the precise figure, and I'm just looking. You can see Part 2 of the budget documents, Appendix D, page 89, that sets out the rise from passenger income. That isn't, of course, given the range of services that TfL offers, the increase in the Elizabeth line coming on board, the Northern line extension coming on board in the time period, all those changes, the extra revenue that TfL receives from the government's policy around national rail fares.
David, could you write to me on that?
What drives that, but it's even looking at those figures, I'm not seeing that that's trying to do maths while talking. That isn't a 30% rise in passenger income, so I'm going to have to question a little bit where that number comes from.
Okay, would you mind looking into that number in the FT article, which was very well set out, and writing to me, please?
I'd be pleased to do so.
Thank you. In terms of other efficiencies, do you agree that you need to drive further the whole issue of efficiencies? And can I give you one example from a previous mayor? Driverless tube trains. Are you prepared to look at driverless tube trains to drive efficiencies in this budget? Mr. Khan?
And which line?
There's 4 lines that Boris set out that he would look at. There was a whole budget report done under the Boris's last year.
How did he do?
What do you mean, how did he do?
How many of those happened?
You became the mayor, sir. Well,
let me tell you about the business plan I inherited. The business plan I inherited said in the year 2017-18, the deficit would be more than £1 billion. At no stage during the business plan that I've published is the deficit so high. So look, a lot of decisions made by the previous mayor you will welcome. A lot of them may be sensible in your mind. I think a lot of those were based on the back of an envelope.
So you're ruling out driverless trains during your mayoralty, are you?
Where they are not safe, I will not countenance them. And so anybody who understands the basic knowledge of the underground system will know there are some deep underground services where the idea of having driverless trains is madness. And for somebody, in the interest of saving some pounds, to risk the safety of Londoners, of staff and visitors is the height of recklessness.
So no driverless tube trains under your mayoralty?
Where it's not safe to do so, I will not do so. Where it's safe to do so, of course we'll consider whatever efficiency savings that we can do so. I'm the first mayor in the history of TfL being set up who has had operating costs go down. This man that you admire and respect and revere never had operating costs go down during the 8 years he was mayor, when fares increased by more than 42%, the highest fares of any city in Europe. Are you proud?
Well, it's MQT, not Assembly Member QT. Can I ask you, Mr. Mayor, you mentioned next week the Homes for Londoners Board is going to do a paper on the TfL property partnership. Will you be prepared to send that next week to AMs, please?
Yeah, I'm sure we can.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, you've announced your new initiative fund, and you've also announced some more money for MOPAC, which is both are welcome. Would amongst those funds, or is there somewhere in those funds where residents can apply for some money to set up community safety groups? You visited Redbridge the weekend, and you may be aware of a number of groups that are being set up by residents to help them look after their own properties, to patrol. Would there be any money available, or where would they look for funding for those organisations, Mr. Mayor?
I'm not clear what I mean. What funding you mean for what?
Well, you would be aware that there's a number of groups now in Redbridge of communities on WhatsApp groups, so they patrol in the evenings because of the high rise of burglaries. They keep in touch with each other because of the high rise in crime. And I'm asking you whether there would be any funding to help support those residents' groups.
Well, look, I was in Redbridge over the course of the weekend. I met a couple of Conservative members heckling me.
Yeah, one of which, Mr. Mayor, I can assure you was not a Conservative. And we would condemn what he said to you, Mr. Mayor.
No, I don't mean the ones heckling me from the Conservative Party in Waltham Forest.
Right.
I mean those heckling me in Redbridge from the Conservative Party.
Well, you're very popular
but I also met with some really concerned residents, and I'm sure you've met them as well.
Exactly.
Roughly speaking, 10. And just, I mean, you all know this, Keith, but for those who don't know, these are traumatised victims of burglary who are at the end of their tether because they've seen a rise in burglary. They've set up WhatsApp groups. I think that's what you mean, I think. So they've set up WhatsApp groups to be good neighbours and to give each other advice and to alert each other if there's somebody around who's suspicious. And I was shocked by what they told me. Some of the trauma they've suffered. A child of 11, as I understand it, being threatened with violence by one of these burglars. So what I've done as a consequence of my meeting is arrange for the Deputy Mayor with the Senior Officer to meet with these, roughly speaking, 10 sort of organisers of the WhatsApp groups, Keith, with the leader of the council to discuss what the police can do to help them. High visibility policing. One of the ideas from the group, which may be an issue of funding, is the issue of CCTV, to provide obviously useful information, but it's a deterrent. If you're a bad guy and there's a CCTV camera being monitored, are you going to, do bad things? And so there are ideas they had, which some of it costs money, which has been looked into and stuff. But yeah. But I'm not sure they weren't asking for, they weren't asking for funding for the group. They were asking for crime prevention funding. But yes, of course, one of the things Sophie's looking into is that area.
So who should I approach, Mr. Mayor?
Well, Deputy Mayor Sophie Lynn is already looking into this, but feel free to please contact her.
Okay, that's fine. That's very kind of you. Thank you.
I misunderstood your question. I thought you meant funding for the groups. That's not what they're asking for. They're asking for prevention.
Some of them are saying, look, there is a cost involved. So I'll discuss it with Sophie. That's very helpful.
Thank you.
The other point is you quite rightly announced that you're having, let's call it an audit of outsourcing because of the Carillion situation. When you're doing that audit of your outsourced suppliers, will you, Mr. Mayor, check to see if they're all paying the London living wage?
Good question. So one of the things I did when I first became mayor was to make sure we're a London living wage employer, including those who have contracts with us. unfortunately, sometimes we think somebody's paying the living wage down the supply chain, and then we later discover they're not. And there's a couple of examples where cleaners at one of our museums, because of trade. Well, I wasn't going to mention West Ham. I was trying to be. So one of them was, you're right, was at the stadium. One of them was at our museum. So if there's information anybody has, please let us know. But the expectation is, and often a condition of the I'm sure that the new contract's the condition is, pay the living wage. Sometimes people may have given us a route map to get there. So they may say, we can't pay it from today. We'll do it by a date in X months' times. And that sometimes can reassure us. But please let me know if there's any examples you have of living wages not being paid.
But the question was, Mr Mayor, and it's not a trick question, when you're doing the audit, because you are quite rightly doing the audit, will you make that one of the questions that you ask everybody?
Yeah. We have a responsible procurement team that the Mayor has set up that is just being recruited and starting now, and one of the things that they have to do is work with procurements and work with across the group to try and ensure good employment practices at all the suppliers we use. So we've already got that initiative running.
Right, okay, thank you.
Assembly Member Duval.
Thank you very much. Mr Mayor, very quickly, after about 16 years of budget making this institution has got, do you think it's time that we do look at participatory budgets more, and would you be thinking about doing something in future years?
Well, I mean, I think I've taken on board many of the issues that have been raised by the Assembly. I think I've given examples of representations made to me, which I've taken heed of. Some would argue my manifesto process was the most participatory process in recent past. The number of ideas that people had, I'm now delivering. And so, you know, during my experience as a politician, I try to involve everyone in relation to ideas they may have. I don't pretend I'm the fountain of all knowledge. If people have ideas on how we can spend this money, they can feed into this. And so I'm hoping I've given an example of being a listening mayor, but if there are examples of improving the budgeting process, I'm always happy to listen. But I'm hoping you've seen over the last 2 budgets I've set examples of me being flexible and pragmatic, whether from our party or from members of other parties as well. I'm happy to take on board ideas that I think are good.
To add to that, Assembly Member, yeah, I received your report on this topic yesterday. The Mayor won't yet have had a chance to see it. As we approach the end of the budget process, really what I'd say to the Assembly, particularly obviously the Budget and Performance Committee, is that it's always a challenging process. The statutory timetables, when we get information from government and the billing authorities, place real constraints on us, but we genuinely want this process to be good as it can be, and so certainly I'll be reading your report with interest and will welcome all suggestions to try and improve the process and get even better outcomes for Londoners.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Whittle.
Mr Mayor, just carrying on from Assembly Member Shah's question, I just wonder whether you would consider, in the 2 years you have left as Mayor, or if you have more, starting up something along the lines of Arts and Business. You might remember Arts and Business. It was quite a big quasi-government organisation to try to get philanthropists on board. And given that we've got a huge number of very wealthy people in this capital, wouldn't this be a great initiative to come particularly from the Mayor?
Thanks, Peter. So yes, it's of course it's a cracking idea to involve business in arts, and we're doing a lot of that with the Mayor's Fund. Yeah. I recently had a meeting with the City of London Corporation. They're trying to raise money from the private sector businesses around the concert hall, which I think is a really good way of doing this. We've involved the private sector in relation to the London Borough of Culture. Justin Simons, the Deputy Mayor for Culture, regularly meets the business community. Bloomberg gave us some really useful help in relation to the cultural and education district. I'm always happy to speak to businesses, and particularly the philanthropic wing of businesses, but also many businesses are interested in the arts, and we should take huge advantage of that as well. It's businesses that sponsor the free concert taking place in Trafalgar Square, where Simon Rattle will be conducting later on this summer. BMW sponsor that. So I'm always happy to speak to businesses in relation to contribution to making arts richer in London.
I'm very pleased to hear that, Mr. Mayor. I was just thinking of something, if you like, dedicated, forward-looking, that's actually a dedicated body, that is basically a general fund as opposed to sponsorship of individuals.
Chair, I know time's up. Can I just answer that one? Because so my Deputy Mayor, Matthew Ryder, is looking into the whole area of philanthropy. I will ask him to speak with you about maybe there's a specific piece of work we could do around arts and the business, if that helps.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that no more questions? Thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of this session. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Martin, and thank you, David. Thank you very much. Right. Now, members, if you can just stay with me. The Assembly will now move to discuss and debate the final draft consolidation budget 2018-19. The Assembly is under a duty to consider the final draft consolidation budget and to approve it with or without amendment in accordance with paragraphs 8, brackets 3, brackets and bracket 7, brackets of Schedule 6 of the GLA Act 1999. At the final draft budget stage, a two-thirds majority of members present and voting must vote in favour of a formal budget amendment in order for the amendment to be carried and to amend the final draft budget. Abstentions are not counted. In accordance with the Standing Order 6.6e, voting on any formal budget amendments at this stage is by named vote. This means that each Assembly member present will be asked in alphabetical order to declare how they wish to cast their votes, for or to abstain. Any formal budget amendments or whether they wish to abstain. So let's move to section 2, the debate. I have received 2 proposed budget amendments and no budget-related motions at this stage. In accordance with Standing Order 6.12F, there will be one debate covering the substantive motion set out on the agenda, any amendments to that motion and any budget-related motions which have been tabled. In accordance with Standing Orders, I now invite members to move and second formal budget amendment in the following order. So can I call upon Assembly Member Bacon?
I've got a budget-related motion. Would you like us to circulate it now or once you finish this part of the business?
No. Let me finish this part and then I'll go on to... where was I? Yeah, thank you. I'm calling upon Assembly Member Bacon to move the amendment that members have in front of them on blue paper from the Conservative group. Thank you. Sorry?
Thank you.
Do you have something to say, Assembly Member? You just arrived. Sorry. You have the floor, Assembly Member Bacon.
Here.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. We are now close to the end of what's been an exhaustive process of scrutinising the Mayor's budget for the 2018-19 financial year. It's a process that began with the publication of the Mayor's draft budget before Christmas. It gathered pace on the 3rd of January when we had the first of the Budget and Performance Committee meetings, and it has featured many hours of scrutiny, both at the Budget and Performance Screening Committee, even more hours of preparation and report drafting, and several hours in front of the whole Assembly, both this morning and, of course, on the 25th of January. Since the meeting on the 25th of January, there have been changes made to the Mayor's final draft consolidated budget, and some of those have impacted on our budget amendments. So rather than repeat my remarks of last month, I'll focus primarily on the changes. Some of the things, though, are the same, and I'll get those out of the way first. The Conservative group continue to accept the additional revenue funding the Mayor proposes to put into the London Finance Commissioner. However, we maintain our objection to using additional money raised from the GLA precept for this purpose. So we propose to fund it by returning the external relations budget to the level it was under Boris Johnson, by rejecting the proposed 15% increase in the budget of London and Partners, and rejecting the proposed 20% increase in the Mayor's office. That would free up an additional £4.4 million to be diverted into the Metropolitan Police budget. Now, on the subject of policing, this is obviously the key headline of this year's budget. And as I stated last month, the police have stepped up to the plate in recent years in terms of making efficiency savings, but the room for continuing to do so whilst protecting police officer numbers is rapidly diminishing, and I think that we have seen cross-party support for that sentiment for some time now. This is why there has been cross-party support from members for an increase in police funding, and it's also why we are supportive of the government's plan to increase police funding levels by allowing the level of council tax to rise beyond capping levels. We're also supportive of the additional £60 million the Mayor has announced that he proposes to put into the police budget as a result of the higher than anticipated level of income from business rates. It's important to acknowledge that the additional £100+ million now going into the police would not be there had it not been for the government giving the Mayor the power to raise the police set by £12 on a Band D property, and for allowing the business rates retention pilot to take place in London. So in the absence of any recognition of this central fact from key opposition politicians anywhere in London, on this side, we congratulate the government for doing so. But that does not mean that we're giving the Met a free pass. The Mayor himself has said on the record that he doesn't believe the Met is operating at 100% efficiency, and it will be vital in future years that they make the best use of the resourcing they have, so we'll be keeping a sharp eye on this, both in the chamber here and at committee. Now, on transport, we've heard some of this morning and a lot yesterday. Things are beginning to look very bleak indeed. As I stated last month, the Mayor has increased long-term borrowing by 46% and long-term liabilities by 27%, but in spite of this is cancelling major infrastructure projects. In recent months, we've heard much aggressive denunciation from the Mayor of the government's so-called austerity measures, which he now seeks to blame for everything. But what we do not hear from him is any mention of why it is that austerity measures were necessary in the first place, namely that the previous government, of which he was a member, comprehensively crashed the economy. When the coalition government took office in 2010, the country was facing economic catastrophe. Public spending was completely out of control. Britain had the largest deficit as a share of GDP since the Second World War. And for every £5 that the government was spending, £1 was borrowed. This was completely unsustainable and is not the case now.
Like the TfL budget.
The economy is well on the road to a sustainable recovery. It's 15.3% bigger than it was in 2010, and the deficit has shrunk by 2/3. Yes, it has. Whereas the annual deficit, when the last government left office, was £107 billion every single year, it's been reduced to £45 billion at the end of the last financial year. And whereas in 2009-10, the government was borrowing £1 for every £5 it spent, at the end of the last financial year, that figure had dropped to £1 in every £17 that it spent. Now, to get to that point, some very difficult decisions have had to be made in a range of areas, and nobody is shying away from that. This is vitally important because without a healthy economy, it is simply not possible to provide the level of funding to public services that we have seen in the past. So it's in this context that what we saw yesterday was a frankly pathetic spectacle of the Mayor seeking yet again to blame the government for failings that he is largely the architect of. I'm referring to the most recent wailing and gnashing of teeth from the Mayor's office about the £700 million reduction in revenue support provided by the government to Transport for London. Now, in doing so, I don't seek to downplay the impact of a reduction of that scale, but the context which I have just set out is important. Of course, the Mayor, yet again, failed to mention that this was a phased reduction over 3 years. It was known about long before Sadiq Khan had even been selected to be the Labour candidate, and way before he became the Mayor of London. When he was a candidate, and ever since he has been Mayor, and we heard it again this morning, he has consistently lambasted Boris Johnson for increasing fares on the transport network during his time as Mayor. Those of us who were members at the time will remember, under Boris Johnson's administration, the reasons that were stated for putting up fares. And that was because it was necessary for the vital infrastructure improvements needed on the network, a network that had only had piecemeal improvements in the decades preceding it. Sadiq Khan was warned endlessly throughout the mayoral campaign that his partial fares freeze would blow a hole in TfL's budget and would prejudice continued infrastructure improvements. But as in many other areas, he put his personal short-term political needs ahead of the long-term needs of London, ignored those warnings and implemented his partial fares freeze anyway. In addition to this act of pure folly, Passenger numbers have begun to fall, and Transport for London have got their fares forecasts drastically wrong in each of Sadiq Khan's 2 years as mayor. Last year, by in excess of £230 million, 5% wrong. No one who had evidence given by Transport for London to the Budget and Performance Committee in January will have been reassured by what they heard. While it is true that the Elizabeth line will be open towards the end of this mayoral term, that will bring additional costs as well as additional income. And the idea that TfL are suddenly going to turn all this around by increasing fares income by 22% within the next 2 financial years seems farcically unlikely.
Hear, hear.
TfL under Sadiq Khan are in a calamitous state, and the results are there for all to see. Cancellation of major infrastructure upgrades to the Northern and Jubilee lines, cancellation of the Metropolitan line extension, and cancellation of the Sutton tram. As we've said many times before, flashy short-term decisions can have long-term consequences. We are, however, pleased to see that the Mayor has fully caved in to the cross-party pressure brought to bear on him over his original proposal to cut the funding given to the taxi card programme by 13%, so that aspect of the amendment we proposed last month has been removed. In the draft budget, we also saw a drastic cut in the level of local implementation plan funding provided to the boroughs. Now, there has been some improvement on this situation, and we are pleased that the Mayor has given some ground on this, again in the face of cross-party pressure, and has repaired some of the damage from his draft budget by diverting £11.6 million from the additional business rates income into this year's LIP funding settlement. He claimed this morning that this was additional money. It's not. It's simply a reduction in the scale of the reduction. But that still leaves a cut in place of £37.4 million, and our amendment will fully reverse the Mayor's proposed cut for the forthcoming year. We will fund it primarily by scrapping the TfL nominee passes that we've been calling for many years. Again, members are very familiar with our arguments on this issue, so I don't propose to repeat them here. So with that, Madam Chairman, I move the Conservative Group amendment.
Thank you. Can I call upon Assembly Member Bailey to second this amendment? Okay. Any speakers? Oh, sorry, let's go and take, we're going to have that discussion after we've heard from the Green Party group and their proposal. Call upon Assembly Member Russell to move the Green Party amendment.
At the grassroots, borough and at citywide levels. Whenever we're out and about, it's clear that this city's brilliant people often have the best ideas about how to tackle the problems our communities face. A bit more support or investment from the Mayor would give these Londoners more of a say over changes that affect their lives and give a leg up to some fantastic projects that would otherwise just not happen. We don't think the Mayor is going far enough, so we're tabling a budget amendment with 5 proposals for putting the Mayor's budget to better use, and these are split into 2 packages. In the first package, we dedicate a total of £3.65 million to 3 funds to empower residents in decision-making, involve communities in local projects, and support small business owners who face difficulties. And in the second package, we'd get the Mayor to invest around £26 million for the future, setting up a fully licensed energy supply company and increasing funding for local implementation plans to previous levels. Some of our proposals in this amendment have more funding than in our previous amendment, given that the Mayor has ended up with a lot more income than he'd anticipated, mainly from the business rates. This also means we no longer need to divert funding from other budgets, such as that of London and Partners. We don't disagree with all the Mayor's plans in his final budget, and we welcome some of the changes he's made since he published his draft consultation budget. For example, it's a scandal that London bus drivers don't yet have access to toilets to use on shift, 24 hours, 7 days a week. But it's great that the Mayor has listened to me and others who have campaigned on bus drivers' workers' rights and is now investing £6 million to sort that problem out. He must also, and as he's said this morning, commission an independent investigation into bus driver working bus driver working conditions and invest more in safety training too. So that job isn't yet done, but very glad to hear that he's actually going to move forward on that. Other initiatives the Mayor has now decided to fund: investment in the police on mental health work, an advice line for EU citizens, and £500,000 on economic fairness, should be money very well spent, and we welcome those too. So to move on to the first package of our amendment, we'll look first at business resilience. We all like devolution, and we want London to benefit from the Mayor's influx of business rates. In this new context, even more than before, the Mayor should be pledging more than the £300,000 he announced last summer to help small businesses who've paid their business rates but may be struggling due to an unexpected economic shock. So we propose a £1.5 million fund to help more small businesses overcome unexpected severe disruptions and to boost the resilience of London's economy, funded from the Mayor's Business Rates Reserve. We also really welcome the Mayor's announcement shortly after the last budget meeting that ballots would be a strict condition of his funding for estates where demolition is proposed. My colleague, Assembly Member Berry, will speak more about this shortly. Our proposed fund could help residents make the case that demolition is not good value for money compared with their plans, or it could work up a business case for a different, viable mix of businesses, homes and tenures for a new town centre site. This proposal would still be funded through a 20% GLA planning fee increase. And then we want to see a rebooted Space Hive. This is the Mayor's Community Projects Fund and has a good track record of supporting Londoners to crowdfund from friends and neighbours and of exposing projects to a network of councils, big companies and foundations who are looking for good projects to fund. But we think even more Londoners could benefit and that the Mayor could do this through his citizen-led engagement programme. It's no longer necessary for us to fund this part of our amendment by diverting the planned increase to the London and Partners budget. Instead, we'd give a £2 million boost to Space Hive from the Mayor's new fund for strategic investment projects. Now, the Mayor is seeking bids from across the GLA group for proposals to be paid for through this £140 million strategic investment fund. He said that the principal aim of these projects must be to support economic growth. This money could fund infrastructure projects of real benefit to London, like new cycle superhighways and pedestrian bike and DLR river crossings. But this money absolutely mustn't be used to prop up the faltering Silvertown Tunnel scheme or any of the other proposed road river crossings that sit so incongruously in the Mayor's draft transport strategy. This brings me on to the second part of our amendment. As outlined in our previous amendment, we propose funding a fully licensed energy supply company that would allow the Mayor to invest any energy supply revenue in renewables and measures to cut fuel poverty. We would still fund this proposal through the Mayor's Capital Programme Reserve, noting that he has topped this up with an additional £8.8 million since the draft budget using his business rates windfall. Shortly after his election, the Mayor pledged to maintain local walking and cycling budgets at levels seen at the end of his predecessor's second term. And then it emerged through correspondence between the Transport Committee Chair and the Deputy Mayor for Transport that he was making big cuts. The Mayor acknowledged that pressure from the Assembly and the boroughs has led to his decision to partially reverse the cuts by restoring £11.6 million of this funding. This is a victory of sorts, but we would go further and increase funding for local implementation plans to previous levels using the Mayor's Business Rates Reserve. There is still plenty of wasteful spending at TfL that we could target, but to save the Mayor even more headaches over Transport for London finances, this could be paid for immediately from the Business Rates Reserve without us depleting it to a less than prudent level. And we're looking at a grim situation. Transport for London forecasts the backlog of pavement repairs going up 2.5 times in the next 3 years. That's a lot of extra kilometres of footways needing repairs. And the Mayor's attempts to slash away at the local walking and cycling funding and the overall cycling budget leaves us asking exactly what his Healthy Streets legacy will be. This is the funding that would go into building the types of streets that we can see in the lovely drawings that are scattered throughout his draft transport strategy. Streets with shade, shelter, somewhere to sit, safe protected cycle space. But the Mayor needs to stop drawing lovely, healthy streets and actually build them. 2 years in, and time is running out for him to show he is properly serious on this agenda. On that note, I will finish and let my colleague, Assembly Member Berry, remind us that the Mayor has a record of doing some of the things we suggest. I urge you to vote for this amendment.
Okay. Assembly Member Murray, do you want to...
second now, yes.
You want to second now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Okay, thank you, Assembly. First of all, I want to celebrate the part of our previous budget proposals that isn't in today's amendment. As we discussed earlier, I'm really happy that the Mayor has decided to put a real worthwhile chunk of money back into services to support young people. A year ago, we put an amendment that would have used the small headway we had in the council tax to do a small amount to help. The Mayor told me then he didn't think it was his job to plug the gaps left by government cuts in council youth services, but we pressed on, we gathered the evidence, and this year the Mayor hinted that he might use his expected surplus for young people, and so that was the basis of the Green Amendment in the last budget meeting here. Now we know that we've got proper, significant funds being made available for projects that will help repair some of the damage done to youth services. £45 million will make a genuine difference to many young Londoners' lives. So with the Mayor's U-turn on estate ballots this month too, and the way he's listened and at least reduced the cuts for local transport, I'm pretty happy today. Greens have missed having a Mayor who listens to us. I hope this carries on because we've got plenty more good ideas. Reclaiming City Airport, flatter fares for outer London, some or even any effort to get rent controls, and of course cancelling the Silvertown Tunnel and reducing traffic instead of inducing it. Back to the budget, and I think everyone here is pleased that the Mayor has found the money also to fund the police better, though the government should help too, of course, there. With funding in place for some restoration of officer numbers and more recruitment expected over the next year or two, there's one thing I think we should revisit, which is the potential for positive action to increase the diversity of the police. At the very least, we should be making a huge effort to make sure this new cohort achieves as much as possible to make the police more female and more representative of the different backgrounds of Londoners as a whole. I also, like my colleague, want to comment on the new fund for strategic investment grants with a warning from my own experience. The idea of this being money that people bid for very soon, with expressions of interest more or less now and decisions by May, does ring some alarm bells for me. It's very similar to the way that councils and LEPs, the local enterprise partnerships, were allocated funds in 2013 outside London to distribute rapidly to transport projects. What happened was largely that local councils looked up on the dusty shelf of previously abandoned ideas and pulled down a range of bypasses, link roads, road widenings, junction capacity projects to propose to the LEPs. In my old job, Campaign for Better Transport with CPRE, we analysed the list of projects that came out of this process, and the results weren't good. Nearly 2/3 of the projects, using up more than half the money, were new road capacity, with less than 1 in 5 projects public transport. And of 65 schemes associated with development sites, only 10 involved any public transport or active travel. We found that only in areas where the LEPs went out and asked a range of different people for their ideas were the proposals better balanced and more sustainable. Now, I don't think we have councils in London with a drawer full of old bypasses, but there are certainly some damaging road crossings that could be wheeled out, and I want to warn the Mayor against funding any tired old zombie road projects in London and allow perhaps a bit more time for new green ideas which come from communities and really help support new homes and non-car dependent lives. I do support my fellow AM comment earlier on that the Budget and Performance Committee needs to keep a very, very close eye on this fund indeed. And for the record, I will say on my group, we won't support and we won't vote for the Conservative amendment. I think, as we said last time, we don't want to impose austerity on this building, and particularly not on the communications work that's done here, or on TfL staff and their families. So finally, yes, please vote for the Green Amendment, vote for a proper energy company, for help for people on estates, for real community-level funding for ideas that come from Londoners, support for our small businesses when there's a crisis, and full funding for local transport projects. And even if you don't, please look at our ideas and think about them for the future. We're happy that we've been listened to so far, and we really don't mind if the Mayor or anyone else wants to take our ideas and use them. Thank you.
Okay, members for the debate. Assembly Member Duval.
Sorry, I'm full of cold, please forgive me, but let me just deal very quickly with some salient points. I know it's very difficult for the Conservative group opposite to accept they finally got a mayor delivering on one of their key missions, driving down the cost of TfL, because actually, I think we can all agree, previous mayors haven't done it, including Boris Johnson in the previous administration. He has done what you've been advocating over the previous 4 years that you failed to get out of a Tory mayor. He's driving that down, and he is trying to manage a very difficult situation. And, you know, and I've got to say, whether we talk about how we got here, which I thought was quite illuminating and very interesting, but history is against you and evidence is against you of what the cause of the crash was and the imposed austerity that came afterwards. You've been in power for 8 years. It is a mess across the system, the national system, from immigration to migration to the EU fiasco, NHS, defence, policing, prisons. Everywhere you go in terms of where the government hand is a mess and a legacy of austerity. It's not even being managed well, and that's what will be the test of when the real next test comes at the next general elections about that legacy there. But let's talk about this place in terms of what we've got. The removal of the 700 million, I think it was quite well put. It was well known, and Boris did nothing about it. He carried on managing the TfL finances in those issues. This mayor is trying to deal with it. Yes, you don't like some of the policies that go through it, but he's managing it. He has committed himself to some issues of managing it over a number of years to get it back under control in terms of the operating deficit. And I've got to say this on the LIPS funding, you know, members on this side might have shared some of the concerns at the initial raises, but this is a mayor that has listened, has tried to seek back and put back the issues of LIPS and has done that in terms of what it is. We're still, you know, there are still issues for the future, but I think in terms of where the mayor is going, he's not saying no. If there are monies that become available, that's where it will be prioritised within TfL in terms of those issues. I think he's using the business rates creatively in terms of plugging some of the gaps that are appearing in this budget. And I think that's what I need to say to the Greens. The use of the business rates reserves is you've got to be very careful about this, of how you disturb what you're trying to do on policing as well as TfL in terms of use of those in future budgets. And if I can go to that, and I've got to say, shock horror for Conservative voters, if you're used to consistency from the Conservative group, they usually deliver up a cut. Is it that they've given up on austerity in some way about what they're proposing in the budget, are recognising where we are in our systems? No doubt we're from Assembly Member Bailey on that one. In terms of the Greens, look, in terms of the points that you make in your proposals, the final estate regeneration guide of the London Plan will put the owners probably back onto developers and councillors to fund some of that community engagement. I think it's a point well made. Yes, I think it's there, but it needs to happen, and we need to keep monitoring it. There are already extra resources in terms of the money, in terms of more money going into deprived communities. We just need to see it. Of course we'd like to spend more, but we need to think carefully about it. Your figure of 10 million in terms of energy issues, there is a debate going on. Actually, I think the Mayor's office would say it would cost more, and it may need more investment to achieve what we need to do around the energy company at some stage when we get to those key decisions. And then finally on 4, on LIPS, no, I think you're misunderstanding the LIPS budget in relation to the healthy streets. I think there's been a rearrangement of the walking and cycling budget, but the healthy streets budget has got money in it to deliver. What we do want to see, and I do echo in terms of our Assembly member, is seeing some results out of that and some pilots that we can learn and get good practice across in terms of where London is. And then the last one about the emergency funds for business. Of course, look, LEAP funding, there is some cash there in terms of those emergencies and contingencies. And you're right, any strategic authority needs to have an awareness around when those emergencies arise and act accordingly. And that's really down to the LEAP to do in its strategy, and that's what the expectation will be in this budget and in future budgets of the Mayor. Look, not everyone will be happy with this budget, but actually it's the best of a bad lot given the circumstances, the hand that the Mayor's been given in terms of moving forward. There will be always be bits that we might disagree with or direction of flow. I would say this, one of the most important things in this Mayor's budget, he has laid the foundations to increasing an extra 1,000 officers. It will take time to deliver. But as we sat in that Police and Crime Committee yesterday, we know that the capacity to respond to the needs of Londoners is about police numbers. And we can't go back to where we were before. And yes, you know, I want to manage within the resources, but at least he's put his money where his mouth is in terms of policing and tried to deliver that. This is a good budget in the circumstances we face. I commend it.
Thank you. Assemblymember Pigeon.
Very much indeed. I won't be supporting either of the amendments before us today and overall the budget, and I wanted to explain a bit of my thinking around that. The Conservative one we rehearsed last time, cutting the additional funding to London and Partners, I don't think stacks up. We'll come on to that later in the debate. Travel Watch, once again, I have to defend this body, but you cannot slash bodies funding by half and expect them to deliver what they have to in law. And I think, you know, we may want to change the structure in the future, but that is where we are now. In terms of the Greens, there's some nice ideas in there, but it doesn't address my overall concerns with this budget. There are many things in it overall that I agree with. I'm sure many of us do in this room, but there are areas I have serious concerns. I am really concerned about Transport for London's budget. 2 years ago, every hustings we went to, the Mayor talked about how flabby TfL is. He may have made some savings, but I said to him at the time, it is not flabby. It is not a flabby organisation. And I think we're now seeing the reality of that. We're seeing cuts to buses right across the capital. The Mayor may not have recognised the numbers of buses I was reading out earlier. Buses are being cut, the frequency is being reduced, and we may start to see people, where they have cars, moving back to cars for some of those short journeys. It does not stack up, as has been debated this morning, the issue of the fare projections and the number of passengers. We really need to understand those figures more, but you cannot base a budget on an assumption around fares when you know the last 4 years it just hasn't been correct. And at a time when the government so wrongly is taking away money from Transport for London, commercial revenues down, we've got a perfect storm, and I am very, very worried we're going to see more projects cut that we desperately need in London in the area of transport. But in the area of policing, yes, the Mayor has put more money into that and listened to what many of us have been saying, that more money needs to go in. But this budget supports borough mergers that all of us on the Police and Crime Committee have month after month been expressing serious concerns about. The pilots which showed response times falling across London, pilots that showed safeguarding issues were not being addressed. I cannot support a budget that has that at the heart of it. And the cuts that are going on in policing, we're now assuming we don't have 32,000 police officers in London at a time when crime is going up in every area, and we've seen the additional threat from terrorism only too vividly in the last year. And at a time when we are seeing pressures in the Met around child protection. Child protection does not feature in much that is mentioned by the Met, but they are operating in a way that is so unsatisfactory. And today, we've had the latest report from the watchdog that looks after this, Her Majesty's Inspector, and their latest quarterly report does not show improvement. It shows 89% of child protection cases they looked at requiring improvement or inadequate. Our children in London are being failed, and there is nothing in this budget that shows additional resources going in to tackle this problem of child protection in London. Poor investigations, absence of robust supervision, reluctance to seize devices. It is damning, and there's nothing that reassures me in the Mayor's budget that we're going to turn the tide on tackling this issue of safeguarding children in London. And that is why I won't be supporting the budgets or amendments today. And we really have got to get to grip, particularly around our transport budget, but some of the areas in London where we are failing Londoners. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Curtin.
Thank you, Chair. Well, we've got two very interesting budget amendments before us, which were one from the Green Group, which I'll tackle first. And we're not going to vote with this particular amendment. The major thing in terms of capital being put into the budget is to fund an energy company, which is really not the business of the Mayor. Providing energy is a privatised industry in this country. The Mayor shouldn't be getting involved with it. They're putting a budget here for 13 million into the budget to deal with that. That isn't really going to provide an awful lot of energy for Londoners. Maybe it will provide energy for a few thousand people to boil their kettles, but it isn't really going to solve London's energy problems, particularly with a population which is rising rapidly through rapid immigration into the city. So that's the major thing. There are some interesting ideas which I could perhaps partly support, such as extra money to help businesses in the transition while they have to, while we implement the rate changes to businesses. That's fine, but that's only a small part of their budget amendment. So on balance, in terms of capital, we can't really support that particular amendment. We have the other one from the Conservative group, and it was very interesting to read and listen to Assembly Member Bacon's speech. And he says a lot of good things, and he speaks some good sense there. Some of the things that we would agree with in his budget amendment are cutting money to the Mayor's office, which has become greatly bloated over the last couple of years, and cutting money to London and Partners, cutting money to the Mayor's external affairs. I mean, he doesn't need to say nice things to propagandise himself, which he's very fond of doing. Also, we have an extra 4.4 million to the police. And that's the most important thing that needs to be done at the moment. So giving any extra money to the police, given the rise in various forms of crime, such as knife crime, FGM, which we're all very, very concerned about, is a priority. So I do totally agree with Assembly Member Bacon on that. But what I don't agree with, and he might not take kindly to this, although we have a group here who actually tackles the Mayor in what's happening in London. Unfortunately, I do have to disagree with him because his colleagues over in Westminster have cut the budget to the police, and they do have to take some responsibility. It's not Assembly Member Bacon, but his colleagues down the river in Westminster do have to take some responsibility for cutting the budget to the police. And what his colleagues in Westminster also are planning to do, which we would disagree with, is possibly give £40 billion to the EU to create a deal. We need people, there are some great people in his party who would, I think, negotiate with the EU in a much firmer way than the current Prime Minister, but he did bring that up in the debate, and so there is that issue as well. So it's partly the funding to the police is an issue with Westminster and also the Mayor. They must take joint responsibility. But I do agree with Assembly Member Pidgeon about Travel Watch. I've been on the Transport Committee for a couple of years, and it is a statutory requirement, and to slash Travel Watch's budget by 90% really won't let them fulfil their statutory obligations. So I don't agree with that part of the Conservative amendment. And so we will be abstaining on the Conservative amendment because on balance there are some good things in there, but there's a couple of things that we can't agree to. So thank you for your amendment, and that's our position. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other speakers? No one? Okay. Assembly Member Bailey.
I won't retrace the comments that my colleague, Assembly Member Bacon, made. He gave great detail on our amendment, and I commend it to you because you know it all makes perfect sense. I just want to come on to why I won't be supporting the Green Amendment. Although I like some of the measurements in there, I do think an energy company is probably not the business of the mayor. Will be incredibly difficult to set up, and I'm not sure that the advantages you think it will provide to Londoners will be there. I know you're very fond of things they've done in other cities in our country, but they are tiny compared to London and don't have the same structural issues we do, such as hundreds of old boilers, etc., etc. And I think there's other ways of dealing with energy efficiency in London. Just to say about the mayor's budget and some of the things we heard from our esteemed colleague, Len Duval over there. Ultimately, whatever you say, the mayor's activities have created a huge hole in TfL budget, one of the biggest single budget we have to deal with. And that means that we will always be under the pressure from what the mayor has done. And he has not addressed many of the structural issues around TfL, ones that he himself campaigned on very, very hard and then has just let gone by as he's become the mayor. The thing I'd have to say, no matter how much grumbling you hear from our Labour colleagues, austerity, yes, has been tough for the country and some tough decision has been made, but let's be quite clear, as my colleague Gareth Bacon said, austerity comes from the actions of the Labour Party and what they did when they were in government, a part of the government that this mayor was. And no amount of grumbling and whispering under your breath changes the fact that you crashed our economy, spent huge sums of money with no idea how that money would be replaced.
And your party supported our spending proposals too.
None at all. And what I see in the mayor's budget is a replication of that tactic for London. And you do not help Londoners, particularly struggling Londoners, by having a budget that's unsustainable. So I ask you not to support the mayor's budget, and I commend our expertly explained budget to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Rights of summation. Assembly Member Bacon? No, you have to go in terms of how I've called you.
Interpretation of convention, Madam Chairman, but the mover of the First Amendment is normally the last speaker. That's the way it's been in the 10 years that I've been at this Assembly, Madam Chairman.
Okay, I'll be corrected. Okay. It's like you throw it out and then you pull it back. So, no, you're right. So pulling it back would then mean Assembly Member Russell. I can be corrected. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the debate and the comments from every party on our proposals. Just to start with, I'd like to agree with Assembly Member Bacon that the transport situation is bleak, as he described it, although I think we probably feel that coming from a slightly different perspective. But I fundamentally, and the Green Group fundamentally, disagree with his assessment that austerity, with all its desperately cruel outcomes for Londoners, is a useful or ethical response to the financial crash of 2008. In terms of Assembly Member Duval's comments, I just want to agree hugely about the need for pilots for these transport projects, and so I thought I'd celebrate a bit of agreement there. And Assembly Member Pidgeon, your comments about the bus cuts and the really serious impact that has on Londoners' lives is absolutely fundamental. We need to be working on that hard as a Transport Committee and as an Assembly to make sure that because that could completely unravel the Mayor's plans for air pollution and for reducing traffic and congestion on our roads. And Assembly Member Curtin, I don't think you can have taken on board the reality of fuel poverty that is affecting so many Londoners. A fully licensed energy supply company would provide the mayor with levers that would allow him to A, invest in renewable energy, and B, to address fuel poverty. And that is a situation that is afflicting many, many people living in this city and is something that the mayor absolutely has a duty to consider. And finally, I just want to say that I'm heartened by how much we do all agree in this assembly. And so if you don't all agree with our ideas today, that we've presented today, I hope we're going to get there in the end. And I hope you'll vote for our amendment, and we will not be supporting the Conservative amendment.
Thank you. Assembly Member Bacon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll go through various comments that I heard from members around the chamber in the order that I took them down. On Assembly Member Duval, he mentioned the Mayor is driving down the cost of Transport for London. Well, to a degree, that's clearly correct. He's got no option, of course. I agree with Assembly Member Duval that this was something that the previous Mayor didn't do anywhere near enough of. That's something that those of us Conservative members who were here for the 8 years that Boris Johnson was on the 8th floor pushed him to do endlessly, and unfortunately that didn't happen. We had some good old National Party politics as well. I'm very glad that he took the bait from my speech. Quite invigorating actually, and we'll see at the next election whether he is right. In terms of Sadiq Khan managing the situation at Transport for London, up to a point, but as Assembly Member Bailey has just pointed out, his policies are directly contributing to the parlous financial state that TfL are now in. On lip funding, Assembly Member Duval said that the Mayor has listened, well, only partially, as I outlined in my speech. The £11 million that he's putting in is not extra money, it's simply reducing the scale of the cut. He asked why the Conservative group haven't proposed a preset cut in the budget. Well, I thought we've been very clear on this for a very long period of time. It's because we have accepted the argument that the police needs more money. And so we are supportive of that. And of course, that's why the Conservative government made it possible for the extra £100 million to go in. He described the Mayor's budget as the best of a bad lot. What a glowing endorsement that was from the leader of the Labour group. Well, of course, it is the best of a bad lot because it's the only budget that we have in front of us. Caroline Pidgeon said that cutting London and Partners doesn't stack up. Well, I disagree with that. I don't think I'm the only Assembly member in here to be very dubious about London and Partners and the value that they really add. She's also said that she's really concerned about TfL's budget. Well, she's right to be, as I've just outlined. Assembly Member Curtin outlined why he disliked the funding of an energy company. I have to say I've got some reservations. I think other members have reservations that they share with him. He said that I said some good things. Well, I agree with him on that. He also said that the police government budget cuts, yes, he mentioned police government budget cuts and giving £40 billion to the EU for Brexit, and states this as a reason for not supporting our amendment. Well, it's not part of our amendment. We can have a good old discussion about that, but clearly that's nothing to do with our amendments. That's a bit disappointing. And Assembly Member Russell said she agreed with me on the transport situation being bleak. Well, yes, I agree with that, obviously. And she dislikes austerity. Well, nobody likes it. Nobody actually would like to see austerity in this country, but continuing to spend money we don't have is unsustainable and will lead to the financial ruin of the country, so the options are limited. In terms of the amendments, various members have rehearsed reasons why they like some of the Green amendment and don't feel they can support it. I would add my voice to that. Some of it I do like, and these are things that perhaps over the course of the year could be talked about. For example, I fully support, obviously, the reinstatement of lip funding. One point I don't quite agree on is how you're proposing to fund it, because I think taking out of the business rates reserve, whilst we are in a pilot, it'd be okay for this year, but going forward that could be a bit of a problem. So I can't support that. So that leaves me with the only amendment that I can support, of course, which is the Conservative amendment. Thank you.
Very logical conclusion.
Thank you very much. Now we'll go to the vote, and I'll call upon Rebecca Arnold, Head of Committee and Member Service, to be my assistant. It's a named vote on each formal amendment, so we'll be now looking at the Conservative amendment, and I'll ask Rebecca to call on members.
In accordance with Standing Order 6.6e, this is a named vote. The first amendment to be voted on is the Conservative Group amendment. I will call members in alphabetical order and ask them to indicate whether they are voting for, against or abstaining on this amendment. The Chair and Deputy Chair are listed last. Assembly Member Bacon.
For.
Assembly Member Bailey.
For.
Assembly Member Berry. Assembly Member Boff.
For.
Assembly Member Cooper.
Against.
Assembly Member Copley.
Against.
Assembly Member Desai.
Against.
Assembly Member Devonish.
For.
Assembly Member Dismore.
Against.
Assemblymember Duval.
Against.
Assemblymember Eshalomi.
Against.
Assemblymember Gavron.
Against.
Assemblymember Hall. Assemblymember Curtin.
Abstain.
Assemblymember McCartney.
Against.
Assemblymember O'Connell. Assemblymember Pigeon.
Against.
Assemblymember Prince. Assemblymember Russell.
Against.
Assemblymember Dr. Sahota.
Against.
Assemblymember Shah.
Against.
Assemblymember Dr. Twycross.
I'm against.
Assemblymember Whittle.
Abstain.
Assemblymember Arbour.
For.
Assemblymember Arnold.
Against.
There are 15 votes against, Chair. There are 8 votes in favour, and there were 2 abstentions, and accordingly that amendment is not carried.
Thank you. Let's then move to the next amendment that was discussed under the Green groups.
Can I have the votes from Assemblymember Bacon?
Against.
Assemblymember Bailey. Assemblymember Berry. Assemblymember Boff.
Against.
Assemblymember Cooper.
Against.
Assemblymember Copley.
Against.
Assemblymember Desai. Assemblymember Devonish.
Against. For, sorry. Apologies. Against. Read my phone. Sorry.
Assemblymember.
Just copy me.
Vote in progress.
Assemblymember Dismal. Assemblymember Duval.
Against.
Assemblymember Eshalomi.
Against.
Assemblymember Gavron.
Against.
Assemblymember Hall.
Against.
Assemblymember Curtin.
Against.
Assemblymember McCartney.
Against.
Assemblymember O'Connell.
Against.
Assemblymember Pigeon.
Against.
Assemblymember Prince.
Against.
Assemblymember Russell.
For.
Assemblymember Dr. Sahota.
Against.
Assemblymember Shah.
Against.
Assemblymember Dr. Twycross.
Against.
Assemblymember Whittle.
Against.
Assemblymember Arbour.
Against.
Assemblymember Arnold.
Against.
There are 2 votes in favour, 23 votes against, and no abstentions, Chair, and accordingly that amendment is not carried.
Thank you. Can I now just ask members if they wish to move any further formal budget amendments? None? Okay. No formal budget amendment has attracted the requisite 2/3 majority of votes. We will now move to voting on any budget-related motions, and I will put the substantive motion to the Assembly at the end of the meeting. Papers are being circulated now.
Assemblymember Sahota who's moving the chair. If you want to speak.
Okay. Let's make sure they have it in front of them. you read it? Hmm?
Assembly Member Sode has 10 minutes, Chair.
Okay, members. Can I call upon Assembly Member Dr. Onkonkota to move his budget motion?
Chair, I move this motion because I know that on the plenary session on the 8th of February, there was a motion in front of the Assembly to reduce the funding for the London and Partners, which we thought was a wrong thing to do, given the situation we are in currently. We know that the current funding for the London Partners is inappropriate, it's under-resourced, particularly as it faces the challenge, right, of up to 40% of the operations, which London operations are involved in, right, are reviewing their budget spending in London. So we are at a time when London needs to be marketed to the world that this is a place we are open for business, that we are open for to work with other cities and to attract investment into London, which is going to be flowing outwards unless we can fly the flag for London. And we know we're competing with other cities across the world. And of course, we don't think this money should go to the London Partners unconditionally. We believe that there should be transparency for London Partners. We believe that they should be accountable to the Budget and Accounts Committee. We believe there should be key performance indicators for us to monitor them on. So we welcome the Mayor's decision to increase the funding of London Partners because it needs it, particularly at this time in the business cycle and also in the history of what's happened in this country. But we also think that London Partners should be more accountable, and this is something which the Assembly has unanimously asked previous mayors to do, but we failed to achieve it, and we want to send a signal to the Mayor that whilst we welcome his decision, we also want to see greater transparency and greater accountability for the money spent in London Partners. So I move this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I call upon the second Assembly Member Pigeon?
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to second this motion today, put forward on a cross-party basis, which sets out very clearly that whilst additional funding is needed, given our current position with Brexit and the like, London and Partners needs to address some serious issues relating to the publication of information and accountability. And if you actually look at London and Partners' website, it seems the only information available to the public about how it operates and makes decisions is in its annual review. And for a body that receives public funding, that is simply not good enough. And how it makes decisions on basic things such as the record of gifts and hospitalities received by board members should be in the public domain. And even if it's not technically covered by the Freedom of Information Act, it should operate and answer basic inquiries as if the Act did actually cover them and their work. And this information is routine for the GLA as a whole and the functional bodies, and also for London boroughs. And so we want to see those changes made now. But, let's not underestimate, London and Partners have an incredibly important job to do, particularly given, quite frankly, in my view, the mess that is Brexit. And we should not be complacent that the number of overseas tourists coming to London will continue to rise. We shouldn't be complacent that the number of international students that decide to come to study in London will rise. We certainly shouldn't be complacent that the number of European and global companies will continue to base their global headquarters or European headquarters in London, and those that are here will stay. And you see the rumours only today that Unilever are looking at moving their headquarters from London to Rotterdam, costing us 7,500 jobs in London and the UK. you know, we live in an incredibly competitive world and we shouldn't take that for granted. And the idea that London at this time should not be promoting itself, I think, as we've heard from some of the debate earlier and previously, I think is naive, quite frankly. Our economy is fragile. It is very delicate indeed. And unemployment, we saw yesterday, is starting to rise. We really need to make sure that London and partners are out there selling London and making sure that we retain the business we currently have. But clearly, alongside this additional funding, the motion says the Mayor needs to have key performance indicators so we can measure their success or not against this spend. And it's very clear they've got to start operating in an open and transparent way. Ensuring London is promoted around the world is a really important task, but alongside that, being transparent and accountable. These are not conflicting objectives. So I really hope today that as an Assembly we can unite around this issue and make a unanimous statement about the importance of promoting London and, alongside it, the need for publicly funded organisations to shape up and start being more open and accountable. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I have 6 speakers and there's a lot of grumbling. Can members just give respect to the speakers when they have the floor? Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you, Chair. I think all our groups have roughly the same misgivings about London and partners, and we've been talking about it quite a lot lately. We've had different views about what action to take, and following the debate at the last Assembly meeting, we in the Green Group have changed our proposals for the budget. I mean, there are other ways to find the money for our proposals now, but we've said essentially that we would give them another chance. And I think this motion is good. It makes some good points about transparency and accountability. And it's a reminder from us that we're watching and we want to see improvements. So the Green Group will support this motion. Thanks.
Thank you. Assembly Member Devonish.
I would like to make just one point. Of all the organisations that we scrutinise, the one that really fails the smell test is these guys, London and Partners. And I'd just like to ask one thing, Chair, of you and the leader of the Labour group and my own colleague, Assembly Member Bacon, to write to the Mayor and say not having an Assembly member on the board of London Partners is a joke. We must have transparency. One of us must be on the board to make sure we hold this organisation to account.
Doesn't give us transparency at all. Assembly Member Bacon.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I agree with many of the sentiments in this. The accountability line is very well aimed and it is completely correct, and I think that probably all 25 members in the chamber today agree with that completely. The thing that I don't agree with, of course, and I think this was deliberate, is the line about supporting the Mayor's decision to increase its budget. Well, it would be very odd, wouldn't it, if the Conservative Group moved a budget amendment saying you should not do that, and then 5 minutes later vote in favour of a motion that does precisely that. The problem with London and Partners is that they have repeatedly failed, time after time after time, under the previous Mayor and under this Mayor, to draw a line of cause and effect between their activities and any benefits that they claim to the economy of London. And because they are as untransparent as my colleague, Assemblymember Devonish, has just pointed out, and have made no effort whatsoever to make themselves more transparent, they are not helping their cause. They are deliberately creating an Assembly that is a critic when it could actually be a cheerleader. So the Conservative Group won't be supporting this. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone in the chamber. To be quite honest, I don't actually believe that the Labour Group or the Liberal Democrats actually expected us to, because if you did want our support in this, you would have consulted us beforehand. You knew it was in our motion, in our amendment a month ago. You knew that we had rejected the increase in NLP funding, and you didn't approach us. So you didn't actually expect us to support this, so we'll be voting against it.
Assembly Member Boff.
There's a phrase about polishing a, I can't remember what it is. I can't remember the exact terminology. If you've got an organisation in front of you that is secretive, inward-looking, unaccountable, and not doing a job, you don't just try to open the doors, you abolish it. Get rid of the damn thing. I mean, there we are fooling ourselves in trying to persuade us that London and Partners actually does anything useful. What London and Partners does is it gets an already world brand and says we're now responsible for that. I mean, when I go abroad and I say I'm from London, they don't think I'm from London in Burgundy. They don't think I'm in London, Ontario. They don't think I'm from Arkansas, all the other Londons. They know exactly where London is. And bearing in mind we now have a mayor who seems to fight against foreign investment in London. He commissions reports over the amount of foreign investment there is in housing because there's too much of it. How on earth is London and Partners adding value to a city that is already sucking in investment, already being attractive to the world in terms of jobs, in terms of jobs and investment and tourism? We're already there. Why do we need to spend money on this organisation? I will take absolutely no lessons from anybody else about transparency, because it was this group that stood up against the opacity of the LLDC, of all the mayoral development corporations, of the LDA under the previous Labour mayor. We were the ones pushing for transparency. And so don't for a minute think that we don't support transparency. But what we don't support is throwing money where it's not needed. And that's London and Partners.
Bravo! Bravo!
It's a shame it's not in standing order. He deserves a round of applause for that. Okay, it's left to you, Assembly Member Whittle, to follow that.
Go on, jump up and down.
Madam Chairman, yes, Assembly Member Boff took some of the words out of my mouth, only some of them, I've got some left. Yes, of course, I mean, obviously in a way, who can possibly disagree with something being more transparent, you know, as we see here? Although I have to say, it's not a question of transparency. I mean, I don't even know who these people are. I know what London is, but I don't know who the partners are. I have no idea. Basically, they seem more invisible. But in a way, it's not the reason why I will oppose this motion. And I think David alongside me. And that is, I just don't like the tone of it. What I don't like, and it's actually being completely confirmed by Assembly Member Pidgeon here, this Assembly recognises that the Mayor needs to promote London to mitigate the risks associated with our decision to leave the EU. In other words, it is kind of, yet again, it is a negative thing. The Mayor goes out there, says London is open as though London were closed before. Actually, London was closed while it was in the EU. It's now completely open to the world. But the fact is the whole thing about this sort of somehow mitigate the risks, you know, it's almost becoming embarrassing, the amount of good news we have now about the investment into London, about industry, about the economy. Basically nothing that was said is going to happen is happening. London is absolutely prospering. And this idea that somehow or other this outfit that I've never set eyes on is somehow going to mitigate the risks. Well, I don't agree with the premise of the thing that there were risks. This is an extraordinary opportunity, and all we're seeing is a mayor who basically is trying to sort of, basically do that, but also just prove his own point, which was to be completely and utterly anti-Brexit. And then basically he is actually now really going up a very, very steep hill, and basically it's not going to wash. So I would say, yes, transparency is great, but frankly, the whole premise of the thing, which is anti-EU, is wrong, and indeed we have a great future in London, and we don't really need agencies to deliver it. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you, Chair. I think the most unfortunate thing about this particular amendment is the timing, insofar as we all got it about 30 seconds before we're about to debate it, and the fact that.
Okay, if you can stop, Assembly Member Prince, and then I'll stop the clock. Okay, and let's see if we can hear you without any interruptions. Thank you.
That's very sweet of you, Madam Chair. Thank you. I quite enjoy a bit of heckling, though. But anyway, the most regrettable thing about this is that there's a claim that it's a cross-party motion. It isn't. With all due respect to Caroline, because there are so few people that voted for the Liberal Democrats in the mayoral elections, she isn't recognised as a party. So it's a motion by Labour and Caroline. But the point I'm trying to make is not an attack on Caroline, because I love her dearly. It is about the fact that if the party opposite really wanted this to be a cross-party motion and really wanted the full support of the Assembly, they would have discussed it with the other parties as well as only just Caroline. And had they done so, I suspect that there are definite elements within this motion that we would have quite happily supported. And that, I think, is the greatest loss that we have here today, is that we will clearly be opposing this motion. It looks as though as UKIP will also be opposing this motion. Not quite sure where the Greens are yet. We'll have to wait and see. But had there been some negotiations around this, had there been a bit of a discussion, we could have actually got a motion that would have truly been beneficial to the people of London, because there are definite things in this motion around transparency, also the point that my colleague Tony Devenish made in relation to getting someone on the board. We could have had all that in a motion that we would all agree to, and that would have sent a very clear message to the Mayor. A motion that's only supported by Labour and a couple of other small groups doesn't send a clear message to the Mayor. It just gets him off the hook, actually. So it's a bit of an own goal on your behalf. Thank you.
Okay, calling on Assembly Member Sahota to summate.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much to the Green Party for showing their support. And I'm astonished that I've been in the Assembly since 2012. I've never heard the Tory Party asking for the abolition of the London partners. This is a new declaration of policy and of them saying it should be abolished. Why didn't they ask for this when Boris was the mayor? Now, this is really showing up their true colours, that they say one thing and they preach something else. They say that they agree with most of things here. What they really hurt about is their egos been hurt. They weren't consulted beforehand. Well, if they do agree with some of the parts of it, they have a simple choice. Abstain on it rather than opposing it. What London partners are getting are £1.8 million extra. And we're asking that it should be more accountable. They're going to get the money anyway, regardless of how you vote on the motion. But what you could do is send a message to the Mayor. We want this to be accountable, to be answerable. What's the message going to go to the Londoners? That the Tory group feel that we agree with some bits of it, but they didn't ask us about it beforehand. Our egos have been hurt, so we're going to vote against it. What Londoners want you to do is to scrutinise the investment being made in London partners. And that's going to happen regardless of whether you voted for this motion or against it. And let me tell you another few facts. There's been an 18% reduction in the projects that are coming on the pipeline that London partners know about. There has been a 35% reduction in direct investment in London between 2016 and this year in May 2017. But let me tell you something else interesting. London is giving the wrong signal out. Let me look over the NHS. The number of nurses coming to work in the NHS from Europe has gone down by 90%. The NHS is now crippling on its knees for lack of staff want to come from Europe to work in this country. The message that needs to go out to the world is London is open, London is welcoming people, we're open for investment, and London partners have an important job to do. If you're really true to your colours, support this motion and tell Londoners and the Mayor that we expect them, they're going to be well spent, and we want to hold them accountable to London partners. And the way you vote will really show where you stand. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The budget-related motions are dealt with by a show of hands, and all it requires is a simple majority. So can I see those in favour of the budget motion we have just debated?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 in favour, Chair.
Can I see those against?
is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, Chair.
Thank you. So this budget motion is passed.
By 15 votes for, Chair.
15 votes for. Thank you. Right. Now, members, I have to give you a final call. Are there any further budget amendments to be moved? No. Are there any further budget-related motions to be moved? I will now move the substantive motion, namely to approve the final draft consolidated budget for 2018/19 without amendments. Can I see, and this is a show of hands, can I see those in favour of that motion?
Of the Mayor's budget motion?
Mayor's budget motion.
Right.
It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
Thank you.
7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That's 12 in favour, Chair.
12 in favour of this motion. Can I see those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's 13 against, Chair, so that is not carried.
Right, thank you. Just a few more minutes, just a moment. Let's reach before, we're not at the conclusion yet. So can I then go to say the substantive motion before the Assembly has not been agreed. However, as no budget amendment have been agreed, the Assembly is deemed by paragraph 8, brackets 5, close brackets, of Schedule 6 to the GLA Act 1999 to have approved the final draft consolidated budget without amendment. That concludes the Assembly's consideration of the final draft consolidated budget. Thank you very much. Item 5. Can I ask the Assembly to note the Mayor's report covering the period 5th January 2018 to 8th February 2018? Noted. Can I ask the Assembly to note that the written answers to all questions submitted to this meeting under the Mayor's question time procedure will be provided on 27th February 2018. Item 7. Can I ask the Assembly to rescind its previous decision that the 8th March 2018 plenary Assembly meeting, principally to be used to hold a question and answer session with the Mayor as Chair of TfL and Mike Brown, MVO, Commissioner TfL, for a question and answer session regarding the work and policies of TfL. The summons noticed authorised on 11 January 2018 and issued to the Mayor as Chair of TfL and Mike Brown, NVO, as Commissioner TfL, requiring their attendance at the meeting of the London Assembly plenary at 10 a.m. on 8th March 2018 under the provisions of Section 61 and 62 of the GLA Act, as amended, and agree that the London Assembly plenary meeting on the 8th March instead be used principally to put questions to the Mayor on his draft transport strategy, and to receive and, in accordance with Section 42B of the GLA Act 1999 as amended, consider its response to the transport strategy, noting the requirements set out at Standing Order 3.19 for the Mayor to submit the draft strategy to the Assembly by no later than midday, 6 clear working days in advance of the relevant Assembly meeting, and noting also that approval is sought on the basis that the Mayor and TfL have agreed informally that members may still submit questions in relation to the work and policies of TfL to the 8th March 18 plenary meeting for written answers. We will also at that meeting accept petitions, and members, if they so wish, can put motions. And this is, of course, because we will not be having a plenary meeting until June because of the purdah arising from local government elections. So item 8, The next scheduled meeting of the London Assembly will be the plenary meeting, which will take place at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 8th March. And as I've said, that meeting will principally be used to put questions to the Mayor on the transport strategy. Item 9, there's no urgent business requiring consideration. I bring the meeting to a close. And the performer of the day.
GLA, Chamber, Sound.